Hey guys, tonight we wander into a medieval street that smells more like a forgotten garbage heap than any place you'd want to call home. You probably won't survive this stroll, but let's give it a try. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step forward cautiously, the uneven stones under your feet, slick with something you hope is only rainwater. The truth is, it's not. Medieval streets are rivers of filth. Waste from chamber pots, half-rotten vegetables, animal dung, and even human excrement pour straight from doorways into the gutters. Every breath you take is a gamble, a mix of smoke from nearby hearths, the sour reek of spoiled food, and the sharp sting of ammonia rising from urine-slick stones. Your nose wrinkles, but there's no escape. The air itself seems determined to lodge in your lungs. The soundscape is no better. Hooves clatter, pigs grunt as they root through discarded cabbage leaves, and somewhere nearby, a child wails while their mother empties yet another bucket into the street. The splash is theatrical, almost cruelly comic, and you imagine a passerby unlucky enough to get the contents right across their boots, or worse, their head. People joke that when it rains in town, it really rains, because rooftops and windows alike were used as convenient disposal chutes. Historians still argue whether city authorities genuinely tried to control the mess or just gave up and pretended it was part of civic charm. You press onward your shoes, sinking slightly into the sludge. Each step pulls with a sticky squelch, and you can feel the dampness working through thin leather soles. If you've ever stepped into an unidentifiable puddle on a subway platform, multiply that sensation by 10 and add the distinct possibility of catching something no modern doctor even has a name for. That's medieval street life in a nutshell. A donkey shuffles past, eyes half-lidded, dragging a cart piled with refuse. Its tail swishes lazily, doing nothing to disperse the swarm of flies buzzing like tiny drummers in the warm evening air. You almost envy the donkey. It seems immune to the smell a creature born into it. Humans, however, are not so fortunate. You gag quietly, pulling your cloak tighter, as though a scrap of wool could shield you from the sensory assault. Spoiler, it doesn't. The architecture doesn't help either. Narrow houses lean inward so close their upper stories nearly kiss, forming dark tunnels where sunlight struggles to reach. These shadowy alleys trap the smells, magnifying them. Imagine leaving a sandwich in your locker for a month and then crawling inside with it. That's the effect. Rats thrive here, darting across your path with brazen confidence, their glossy black eyes glinting in the torchlight. One pauses, sniffing the air, as if to mock you, before vanishing into a gap between stones. And here's the odd thing: people don't seem overly disturbed. For them, this is normal. Children chase each other through puddles, splashing filth with squeals of laughter. Merchants shout over the din, hawking breadfish, or whatever hasn't spoiled yet. The grotesque and the ordinary blend seamlessly, until you realize the stench is simply part of the soundtrack of daily life. If you lived here, you'd adapt too, developing a nose so selective you'd barely notice, at least until a particularly ripe heap caught you off guard. There's an old saying that the nose grows accustomed to the stable. Medieval towns took that idea to its extreme. Pigs indeed acted as garbage collectors, rooting through waste with cheerful snorts. Chickens pecked at scraps, while stray dogs circled constantly snapping up bones. These animals doubled as sanitation crews and disease carriers. You're reminded of modern city pigeons, ubiquitous, filthy, yet somehow essential to the ecosystem. Replace feathers with bristles, and you've got medieval pest control. As you stand there, you spot a guild official parading past with a self-important stride, a kerchief pressed firmly over his nose. His shoes are high wooden pattens designed to lift him above the muck. You envy him, but also wonder if he just trips more spectacularly when the inevitable fall comes. Light jokes aside, these contraptions were real early platform shoes born out of sheer necessity. Imagine today's fashion influencers selling medieval streetwear with splatter-resistant patents and perfume kerchiefs. Honestly, they'd probably trend. You glance upward and catch sight of a window opening above. A woman leans out, dumps something unmentionable with a careless toss, and then shutters it closed again. The splash below is ominous, thankfully not directly on you, but close enough that your heart races. A passerby mutters a curse, but life continues. Warnings like Gardes Low, literally watch out for the water, were supposed to alert pedestrians. In practice, they were about as effective as yelling heads up before tossing a bowling ball. The sheer chaos of sanitation or lack thereof reveals just how different the priorities were. Clean streets. Nice idea, but not worth the manpower when survival meant growing enough grain or avoiding the next plague wave. Waste management became everyone's individual responsibility, and most people handled it by throwing problems out the nearest window. It's both absurd and disturbingly practical. After all, why walk to the town dump when gravity works just fine? Your cloak now smells faintly of the street, a mix of smoke dung and decay. The odor clings to fabric like an unwelcome memory. You realize that this isn't just dirt. It's culture, history, and survival, all packed into one nauseating experience. Medieval cities didn't have the luxury of modern sanitation, but they did have resilience. Every sunrise meant another chance to step over the muck and push on with life. And for them, that was enough. You turn a corner, and the smell changes, but not for the better. The new scent is sharper, metallic, even with a sour edge that makes your eyes water. Welcome to medieval water sources, where what looks clear in a bucket might be the deadliest thing you drink all week. Wells dot the town squares, and streams trickle just beyond the walls, but appearances deceive. Every household empties waste into the same ground that feeds those wells, and livestock crowd the rivers, treating them as their personal latrines. You bend down to scoop a handful, but the thought alone makes your stomach churn. Instead, you notice what everyone else is doing. They drink beer. Not the strong kind meant for merriment, but small beer, a weekly fermented brew that children sip as casually as water. It's safer because the boiling during brewing kills some germs, though no one in the Middle Ages knows the word germ. They just know that beer fills your belly without killing you quite as quickly. You lift a cup to your lips and taste the slightly sour, grainy liquid. It's not refreshing, but compared to what's in the well, it feels like a blessing. The scene is almost comic. Imagine toddlers sipping tiny mugs of beer at breakfast, their parents nodding with approval. It's the medieval equivalent of giving kids a juice box, except this juice box might leave you just a little tipsy. Historians still argue whether medieval people were drunk most of the time or simply accustomed to constant low-level intoxication. Either way, water wasn't worth the risk. As you stand by the well, A woman lowers her bucket, chatting casually about her neighbor's failing crops. She hoists it up her arms, trembling, and pours the contents into a jug lined with herbs to purify it. Rosemary, thyme, maybe even garlic, all meant to mask the smell, though none can erase the unseen danger. You're reminded of modern people frantically adding lemon slices to tap water pretending it tastes cleaner. Some things never change. Nearby, cattle wade into the stream, tails swishing as they relieve themselves without ceremony. Children splash in the same water, shrieking with joy as droplets sparkle in the sun. The disconnect is staggering to them. It's play. To you, it's a public health crisis waiting to happen. Yet somehow, they endure. Life expectancy may be low, but survival depends on adapting to the filth, not eliminating it. A man passes with a cask strapped to his back, sloshing with ale brewed in his cottage. He sells it by the cup, shouting prices to anyone within earshot. You can almost imagine a medieval slogan: beer, it's what keeps you alive. And in truth, it does. The weak alcohol staves off thirst while avoiding the worst illnesses spread by contaminated water. It's the closest thing they have to a health plan, and everyone from farmers to monks relies on it. The monks, in fact, perfect brewing into an art. Within monastery walls, barrels line cool stone cellars, bubbling with foamy concoctions. The brothers keep meticulous notes on recipes, adjusting ingredients like hops and barley, with a precision that borders on obsession. To drink their beer is to taste devotion itself, though not everyone can afford such quality. For most peasants, beer is whatever their household pot manages to ferment without exploding. As you sip another gulp, the tang clings to your tongue. It's not thirst-quenching, but it settles your stomach more than the idea of well water ever could. You glance once more at the bucket dangling in the square, swaying gently in the breeze, and thank your luck you didn't drink it. The liquid inside shines innocently, but you know better now. In the medieval world, clear water is never to be trusted. You follow the crowd away from the well, and toward heat, always, heat ducking into a dim room where steam hangs like a curtain and voices echo off wet timber. You don't find marble baths and scented oils. You find a wooden tub, a battered bucket, and a line. If you want clean, you'll earn it one ladle at a time. Here, bathing isn't a languid luxury, it's logistics. Someone hauls water, someone feeds the fire, someone tests the temperature with a brave finger, and you shivering in your linen bargain with yourself about how much dignity a splash is worth. You learn fast full-body immersion is rare. Face hands and pits carry the day, and a brisk wipe with a damp cloth counts as victory. Soap exists, but not in pretty bars, stamped with laurel wreaths. It's lye and fat, sharp, hungry stuff that can strip grease color and your sense of humor in one go. You rub it between your palms, and it bites back a reminder that cleanliness costs skin. In many homes, ash and sand join the fight, scouring what the lye leaves behind. Think exfoliation, but with the tenderness of a millstone. The bathhouses where a town has them pulse in the evenings. In England, they'll later be nicknamed stews, a word that tells you everything about temperature and nothing about subtlety. You step inside, and the room blooms with steam and talk traders comparing prices, apprentices bragging, someone reciting a half-remembered prayer to bless the water, just in case. A boy moves down the line with a dipper, and a grin that says he's paid in tips and gossip. You keep your eyes on your bucket. Look around too much, and you'll collect stories you didn't want. There's a rhythm here. Heat, sweat, rinse, scrape, breathe. A strigil more a Roman habit than a strictly medieval one has cousins in dull knives and wooden scrapers that lift grime the way a snowplow lifts slush. You try one and blink at what comes away. The scrape leaves you pink and unexpectedly light, like shrugging off an extra layer of yesterday. Linen does a quiet job too. You change your shirt and it wicks oils and dust from your skin. Wash the shirt and you've laundered yourself by proxy. Practical, slightly depressing, surprisingly effective. Mainstream fact arrives on a tide of chatter in many towns. During the High Middle Ages, public bathhouses really are popular places to warm bones, gossip, and sometimes eat a bit while you steam. Later, authorities will frown after epidemics, and some physicians will warn that hot baths open the pores to bad air. For now, though, most people treat a soak like a market day for the body. You go when you can. You buy what heat you can afford, and you leave before the price doubles. Historians still argue whether ordinary folk bathe monthly, seasonally, or simply whenever water, fuel, and time align. What no one argues is that labor and firewood, not laziness, set the schedule. You tuck a sprig of rosemary behind your ear because everyone else does. It smells like courage, or at least like not sweat. Quirky tidbit: some households simmer herbs, sage, lavender, bay in little pots to make sweet water for wiping down. Nobles lean into rosewater and civet. Peasants make do with a bundle of dried greens and optimism. If you're lucky, a friend passes you a pinch of ground, orris root. Rub, breathe, pretend you're a garden instead of a person who lives beside a dung cart. You stand and feel the air lick your damp shoulders. The room hums. A woman tells you her mother swears by a dry bath, 10 minutes with a rough linen towel after warming by the hearth, no water at all, because fuel is dear and winter is longer than pride. A man pats his belly and declares a quick dunk in the river is godly because it's free, which is exactly the sort of opinion you expect from someone who doesn't mind sharing a current with cattle. You choose not to be godly today. You learn to stage the operation like a siege. Water heated in shifts. Tubs shared by rank and coin, the smallest children. First then, older siblings, then parents, then whoever drew the short straw, and the cloudiest bucket. You catch yourself grinning at the idea of modern bath bombs detonating in this world. Here the only fizz you want is the sound of pitch, popping in the hearth. That means the next ladle will be properly hot. Call it spa minimalism. One tub, one bucket, one stubborn will to feel human. And still the street clings to you. You scrub until your arms ache and discover the limit of soap is not dirt, but time. The lye leaves your knuckles stinging. You dip them in cool water and watch the redness recede like a sulking tide. Someone hands you a small dish of animal fat to soften the blow. You hesitate, then smear it over your hands, becoming soft and slightly bacon-scented. Nobody complains. In this world, smelling like the kitchen is halfway to holiness. A monk visiting from a nearby house sits on a bench and talks about order. In his cloister, he says they bathe on a schedule when wood and rules allow. They keep a warming room for the sick, and the infirmerer has opinions about temperature that rival a bishop's on doctrine. He mentions almost shyly that too much bathing can breed vanity, too little sloth. You file that away with other medieval paradoxes. Drink beer to stay healthy, but don't drink too much. Heat yourself to be clean, but not too hot. Moderation enforced by fuel. You trail a finger along the tub and marvel at the film that immediately coats it. One person's clean is another person's residue. You imagine a sign on the wall, "Please leave your sins and your sediment outside and stifle a laugh. A woman across from you catches the almost laugh and gifts you a smile anyway. It's conspiratorial, the fraternity of people trying to stay decent in a world that hurls mud faster than you can wipe it away. Out on the street again, the winter air smacks your damp neck and you hiss. For 5 glorious minutes, you feel fresh, sharp-edged, almost modern. Then the city reasserts itself. Smoke stitches into your hair. A passing pig prints your ankle with a hopeful nose. Somewhere above, a shutter claps open, and you instinctively step left. Clean is a moment. Dirty is the weather. The realization doesn't depress you as much as you expect. In a place where survival is the job, small victories matter. A hot rinse, a clean shirt, rosemary in your pocket. That will do. You tug your linen straight and feel the rough weave bite back. The fabric squeaks faintly against your skin. Proof the lie did its work, proof you did yours. You are not polished. You are scrubbed. You can live with scrubbed. As the sun drops and the alleys turn to ink, you catch your reflection in a wavering puddle and barely recognize the version of you that arrived an hour ago, duller in the eyes, but warmer at the core. The city hasn't changed. Your grip on yourself has. A boy sprints past with a sloshing pail and a grin too big for his face. Hot water he crows to no one and everyone. You watch steam unravel into the cold like a banner. For a breath or two, it smells like rosemary and hope. You wake one morning in medieval Europe, scratching at your scalp. At first you think it's just your imagination, but no, it's lice. Nearly everyone has them crawling through hair, nesting in seams of clothing, and making daily life an itchy misery. Lice weren't just a nuisance, though. They carried disease, spreading fevers across communities that had no idea their head-scratching neighbors were walking plague factories. You watch a woman comb her child's hair with a fine-toothed bone comb, crushing the insects between her nails with an audible snap. It's strangely satisfying and deeply disturbing all at once. Fleas join the party too, hopping from person to person, especially where straw bedding never gets replaced. Entire households became banquet halls for parasites, and no one truly escaped. Some people tried desperate measures, rubbing garlic or vinegar into their hair, or even sprinkling ashes on themselves. Nothing worked for long. Modern bug spray would have been a miracle, but instead they endured. It was common for peasants to joke bitterly that if you didn't have lice, you weren't really living. That joke hits differently when you feel the phantom itch on your own skin. Of course, the biggest villain wasn't just discomfort. It was the Black Death. Fleas on rats carried Yersinia pestis, and when they bit humans, the results were catastrophic. Entire villages vanished, and still people didn't know the real cause. They blamed bad air, divine punishment, or even unlucky neighbors. Imagine scratching your arm, wondering if the next bite was just another annoyance or the start of something fatal. Historians still argue whether medieval people truly accepted parasites as unavoidable or if they constantly searched for better cures. But either way, the scratching never stopped. Inside the dim hut, you see shirts and tunics hanging by the hearth, stiff with sweat, grease, and dirt. Washing them is rare water, is freezing soap expensive, and the results temporary. Every seam hides eggs of lice, tiny nits, clinging stubbornly to fabric. Mothers inspect clothing in the firelight, picking at them with fingernails sharp from practice. It's part grooming, part survival, and part resignation. Think of it as the medieval version of a Netflix binge hours spent hunched together, picking, chatting, and killing bugs one by one. Then there are the bed bugs. Yes, even in the Middle Ages, they thrived. Straw mattresses flattened into dense bug-filled mats, buzzing with unseen guests. If you ever wondered why medieval folks preferred sleeping sitting up in chairs sometimes, here's a clue. Bed bugs feasted at night, leaving bites that swelled and burned. Combined with fleas and lice, it was a full symphony of itching. Imagine the soundtrack, scratching, sighing, and muttered prayers night after night. There were even stranger remedies. Some people believed wearing a pouch of herbs would ward off vermin, the scents too strong for pests to handle. Others rubbed animal fat into their skin, hoping to suffocate the creatures. Did it work? Not really. But when the options are limited, even smearing goose grease seems worth a try. And hey, at least it made your skin shiny in the firelight. The strange part is how normalized it all was. A noble woman might scratch under her jeweled veil at court, while a farmer did the same in the field. No one was truly clean. Lice and fleas didn't care about status. They were the great equalizers, jumping happily from velvet cloak to wool tunic, reminding everyone that beneath the trappings, they were all just food. You tug at your own collar, half expecting to find one crawling, and feel grateful for your modern shampoo. By the time you crawl under a straw blanket, you realize that gross is relative. For medieval people, this was simply life scratch, endure, repeat. And as you drift to sleep, the thought itches at you. Maybe the true soundtrack of the Middle Ages wasn't church bells or lute songs, but the constant chorus of nails against skin. You shuffle down a muddy medieval street, following the sour tang in the air until it nearly knocks you backward. Human waste is everywhere, slopping down alleys, dripping from chamber pots, tossed casually out of windows, soaking into the dirt beneath your boots. Forget indoor plumbing. The closest most people get to sanitation is shouting, "Look out below," before dumping last night's stew remnants and urine onto whoever happens to be walking past. The street doubles as both highway and sewer, and you're forced to step carefully, balancing on cobblestones while hoping your shoes' thin leather at best don't soak through. In theory, there were regulations. Some towns even had ordinances about when you could empty your chamber pot, but in practice, rules dissolved like manure in rain. The result was an open-air cocktail of smells so strong that visitors from cleaner regions often wrote about it in their journals. You imagine someone from the 21st century fainting, instantly overcome by a stench that medieval noses had simply learned to ignore. Historians still argue whether these people were truly desensitized or just perpetually miserable. But one thing's certain, it was never fresh. Every town had cesspits, deep holes dug to collect waste, but these filled quickly. When full, they overflowed, seeping into wells and streams, contaminating the very water people depended on. Night soil men made a living, scooping it out and carting it away, sometimes spreading it on fields as fertilizer. The job paid decently, but earned no friends. The smell clung to them like a curse, marking them in every crowd. Imagine walking into a tavern and the entire room shifting away from you without a word. That was their daily reality. You pass by one such crew, their shovels sinking into a pit behind a row of houses. The squelch makes your stomach turn. Yet to farmers, this was wealth. Waste spread on fields meant stronger harvests. And in a world where famine lurked around every corner, practicality outweighed disgust. If food grew, no one cared how. You might wrinkle your nose now, but when hunger gnaws, you'll gladly eat bread grown from last year's sewage. Of course, not every disposal system was so organized. Some castles had garderobes, stone chutes built into the walls that emptied directly into moats. Standing over one, you'd feel a draft and know exactly where it came from. Soldiers unlucky enough to storm a castle from the moat found themselves waist deep in what historians politely call organic obstacles. You can picture them swords, raised armor, gleaming only to sink into muck so foul even victory would taste like loss. The streets, meanwhile, told their own story. Pigs and dogs roam freely, snuffling through piles of waste for scraps. Children played nearby barefoot and carefree, immune, or perhaps oblivious to the hazards underfoot. The concept of germs didn't exist, so illness was blamed on miasma, the bad air rising from filth. Ironically, they weren't entirely wrong. Breathing those fumes certainly didn't help anyone's health, even if the real killers were microscopic. Step into a medieval market, and the chaos intensifies. Butchers slaughter animals on the spot, blood pooling into the same gutters that carry human waste. Fishmongers toss scales and guts into the street, adding to the stew. Flies swarm so thick you can hear the buzz, yet shoppers haggle cheerfully, noses half dead to the stench. This was life, and if you wanted fresh meat, you endured the puddles of filth surrounding it. And then there's the footwear problem. Shoes, if you could afford them, were thin leather soles barely sewn to uppers. Step wrong in a dark alley, and the liquid squishes between your toes. No amount of scraping against the threshold will erase that feeling. People carried the streets home with them, into kitchens, into beds, into every corner of daily life. The line between outside filth and inside comfort didn't really exist. For a moment, you stand in the center of it all, overwhelmed. The sound of sloshing boots, the sight of pigs rooting in trash, the smell of human life at its rawest. You think of modern plumbing, hidden pipes, silent drains, clean bathrooms, and feel like royalty by comparison. Medieval sanitation wasn't just gross. It was omnipresent, shaping every breath, every meal, every sip of water. And as you take one careful step forward, you realize the only way to survive here is simple: stop noticing, or you'll never stop gagging. You wander into a cluster of small cottages drawn by the unmistakable tang of smoke and something sour-sweet drifting from inside. Today is laundry day, or as close as medieval people ever get to it. You peek through a doorway and find a woman hunched over a steaming cauldron, stirring a brew that looks more like witchcraft than soap. It's lye boiled from wood ash, thickened with animal fat, sometimes mixed with herbs if she's lucky. The smell is acrid, almost biting, stinging your eyes as you step closer. Washing clothes here isn't just work. It's warfare against dirt and smell. Clothing, after all, carried the real filth of daily life. Shirts stiff with sweat tunics, soaked with smoke bedding, filled with lice and fleas. All of it piled up until someone couldn't stand it anymore. Most people owned only a few garments, so washing wasn't weekly, or even monthly. It was whenever filth won the battle. You watch her plunge a coarse woolen shirt into the bubbling pot, using a paddle to stir it like soup. The steam rises, carrying with it a nose-burning reek that feels anything but clean. What's remarkable is how rare this scene is. Washing clothes consumed fuel, water, and time-precious resources in a world where every log and drop mattered. Some households skipped washing entirely, preferring to air out clothes in the sun or beat them with sticks by the river. It's the medieval equivalent of spraying air freshener instead of actually scrubbing. Historians still argue whether peasants routinely laundered linen or simply endured, but evidence suggests clean shirts were prized as a badge of decency, even if the rest of you smelled like a barn. The process itself was brutal. After soaking in lye, garments were rinsed in freezing river water beaten against rocks to loosen grime. Women stood ankle-deep in icy streams, swinging heavy cloth until their arms burned. By the end, the fabric was cleaner, yes, but also thinner frayed and reeking faintly of ash. The choice was simple: dirt or wear your clothes to death. No wonder many people settled for the dirt. And then came the drying. Clothes flapped stiffly in the wind, frozen into awkward shapes, in winter crackling like brittle parchment. Imagine pulling on trousers that feel more like wooden planks than fabric. You'd walk stiff-legged until body heat softened them, creaking like a badly oiled hinge. It's almost funny until you remember it's your only pair. Perfume offered a shortcut. Nobles splashed rosewater or lavender to mask odors, while peasants stuffed pockets with herbs or crushed mint into collars. It didn't clean anything, but it made life a little more bearable. Quirky tidbits, some even carried pomanders, small balls filled with spices, sniffing them dramatically whenever stench threatened to overwhelm. It was equal parts hygiene and theater, the medieval version of pulling out a scented hand sanitizer. Your modern brain rebels at the sheer imbalance. You're used to tossing clothes into a machine, pushing a button, and walking away. Here, laundry is a day-long ordeal involving fire river muscle and prayers. You picture medieval parents telling children to put on your good shirt and realize that good might just mean the one that smells least like smoke and pigs. By evening, the woman drags her laundry from the river, arms trembling, skin red from cold. She wrings each shirt with the determination of survival, then hangs them across a rope strung between trees. The fabric drips into the mud below, undoing half the work, but no one complains. Clean in this world is relative. It's not fresh linen on a hotel bed. It's a shirt that doesn't crawl or knock you unconscious with its stench. As you leave your nose still stinging from the lye, you realize something unsettling medieval clean would still smell foul to you. But for them, this was triumph. To slip into a freshly boiled, sun-dried shirt was luxury, a reminder that in a dirty world, even small victories mattered. You press your tongue against your teeth and feel the gritty film that never quite leaves. Mourning in the Middle Ages doesn't come with mint or foam. It comes with a wooden pick, a handful of ashes, and a prayer. Tooth care here is less ritual than improvisation. You chew the end of a twig until it frays an impromptu brush and work it along the gum line. Then a pinch of salt or soot rubbed with a damp cloth, and you spit into the hearth where the paste sizzles like it's offended to be seen. Clean is a mood, not a measurement. The first problem is the menu. Your bread is dark and dense, milled on stone that throws tiny grit into the flour. Every chew is gentle sandblasting. You tell yourself that's exfoliation for teeth. It's not. Gums swell, enamel thins, and a dull ache becomes an old friend you never invited. If you're lucky, you can rinse with warm ale or watered wine. Vinegar makes a bold cameo too welcome to medieval mouthwash, equal parts bravery and bad decisions. The aftertaste lingers like gossip. Mainstream fact-time toothbrushing as a daily standardized habit won't bloom in Western Europe until long after your lifetime. In the 13th and 14th centuries, care is piecemeal powders of charcoal, crushed herbs, ground eggshell, or burnt bread. Rinses of wine brine or herbs steeped in what passes for clean water. Barber surgeons, not dentists, handle the hard cases. Their sign is a striped pole. Their tools are hooks and forceps you pretend not to notice. You sit. You grip the chair. Someone says, "This will be quick," and you suddenly discover how long a single minute can last without anesthesia. You try to get ahead of the pain with household lore. Clove and sage go into little packets you chew when a tooth throbs. Rosemary, your old bathhouse friend, returns as a breath charm tucked in your sleeve. A neighbor swears by rubbing honey with ground pepper along the gums, sticky, spicy, briefly numbing. Quirky tidbit. Some swore toothaches came from toothworms living inside the tooth, and a few recipes promised to smoke them out with heated seeds or herbs. You don't see a worm, but you do see stars. The rich don't escape, they just decay differently. Sugar, still a luxury, sneaks into courts, and great houses as candied fruit and fancy subtleties. It dazzles, then it drills. The poor gnaw grain and grit, the rich nibble sweetness and vanity. Everyone ends up in the same chair when a molar mutinies. Historians still argue whether medieval mouths, on average, fared better than those of later sugar-soaked centuries. What they agree on is simple. When a tooth went bad, here it went bad loudly. You watch a barber surgeon set up near the market, a stool, a basin, an iron tool curved like a question mark. He's cut hair all morning. Now he cures headaches, removes splinters, lances boils, and when the line grows, brave enough, pulls teeth. He hums. The patient does not. The crowd leans in morbidly kind, the way people always have when pain becomes a public performance. One swift wrench, a wet gasp, a tooth held high like a trophy. The barber drops it in a jar that rattles with other victories. A boy counts the clinks and looks impressed. You cradle your jaw unconsciously. At home, hygiene is half habit, half hope. After meals, you pick with a bone sliver and swish ale to chase out crumbs. A good day ends with your mouth merely tired. A bad day ends with you lying by the fire palm pressed to your cheek, bargaining with saints you barely remember. You mutter, promises fewer nuts, more rinsing anything to stop the drumbeat in your jaw. When the pain ebbs, you become pious for a day, and then forget like everyone else trying to keep fields plowed and children fed. Breath is its own battlefield. Garlic onions, sour beer, and old cheese gather for a party no one else enjoys. You fold rosemary and mint into your collar, a portable garden, whistling faintly every time you breathe. On festival days, you crush anise or fennel seeds and let them crackle between your teeth. It helps, sort of. Truthfully, the entire town smells like smoke and animals, so halitosis just blends into the choir. Romantic gestures involve distance, not roses. You pass a churchyard and catch whispers about relic water guaranteed to cool the tooth. Someone sells a vial. You consider it longer than you'd admit. Faith and placebo are cousins, and sometimes a cousin is welcome at the table. In a world without painkillers, belief is aspirin. A monk's recipe promises relief. Ground oak galls a little alum. A rinse of salt and wine held in the mouth while reciting a psalm. You try it. The psalm helps. Maybe the wine helps more. Night brings the loudest aches. Heat pools in your jaw like coals in a brazier. You prop yourself upright, because lying down makes the pounding worse. A friend suggests packing a cavity with wool ash and bear fat. Don't ask where the bear came from, and you actually do it. For an hour, you feel like a candle about to be lit. Then the pain fades to a manageable pulse, and gratitude walks in on quiet feet. You promise again to pick and rinse after every meal. You probably will. For a week. On market day, you spy a noblewoman laughing behind her hand teeth a little darker than you expected. Wealth buys silk, not enamel. She dabs a clove-scented pomander to lips and murmurs something witty. The man beside her laughs too loudly, his front tooth swaying in place like a loose gate. You realize the great equalizer in this century isn't law or love, it's teeth. Everyone fears the same small, relentless pain. Everyone dreads the same chair. There are bright spots. A linen underkerchief, kept clean, when you can manage it, does more for your gums than any charm. That twig you chew becomes a habit. You look forward to an evening ritual by firelight, with the small comfort of doing something, anything. You become deft with the bone pick, careful not to slice the gums. When you spit a fleck of brown and the ache softens, you feel a victory as real as any harvest. By candle's end, the room smells faintly of herbs and warm wax. You close your eyes and picture a tomorrow where bread isn't studded with grit and where a cup of hot, clean water waits beside your basin. It's a fantasy, but you hold it anyway. You tuck a sprig of rosemary into your collar, the city's universal perfume, and your private callback, and lie down jaw-easing at last. Somewhere outside, a barrel cart creaks and a pig snuffles. Inside your mouth rests not perfect, but temporarily at peace. In this world that counts, you sit down to dinner in a smoky hall, and the first thing that greets you is not the food, it's the flies. They dive for the trenchers, those thick slabs of stale bread that double as plates. You brush them off, but they come back stubborn as gossip. Food here is never alone. It shares space with dust insect smoke, and sometimes even the occasional mouse bold enough to dash across the table. You learn quickly, medieval dining isn't about savoring flavors. It's about accepting the extras. Meals are built on bread, and not the fluffy kind. This bread is dark dense, baked with coarse flour that carries bits of stone from the mill. Every bite scrapes your teeth like chewing sand. You picture your dentist weeping. Still it fills bellies, and in this world, that's the goal. Meat, when you get it, comes salted or smoked, preserved within an inch of its life. A hunk of beef tastes more like brine than flesh, but it keeps through winter. If you're lucky, someone softens it in a stew, turning salt into flavor. If you're not, you gnaw until your jaw protests. Mainstream fact food safety, as we know it, didn't exist. Rotten meat was sometimes masked with spices or soaked in vinegar and wine. Fish not quite fresh still made it to market swimming in barrels of brine thick enough to hide any sins. Trust your nose wasn't just advice, it was survival strategy. Historians still argue whether medieval people truly tolerated spoiled food or simply didn't notice after generations of dulled senses. But your stomach knows the truth. One wrong bite, and you're praying to every saint you can name. Quirky tidbit. Some believe that heavily spiced dishes weren't just tasty, they were medicinal. Pepper, ginger, cloves, all rare and expensive, were sprinkled like shields against illness. Nobles showed off their wealth in clouds of spice, while peasants made do with onions and garlic. You chew a slice of onion so sharp it clears your sinuses, and for a moment you actually feel healthier. Maybe they weren't entirely wrong. Drinks tell their own story. Water is risky, pulled from wells that double as waste collectors, so everyone drinks ale or weak beer from toddlers to elders. It's safer, though not exactly refreshing. Wine appears if you're rich or near a vineyard, often watered down and slightly sour. Milk belongs mostly to calves. People prefer turning it into cheese. So your choices at supper are buzzed, soured, or skeptical. You pick buzzed. Dining etiquette. Primitive by modern standards, but not without rules. Knives are personal tools, you bring your own. Forks exist, but suspicion surrounds them in much of Europe. Hands do the heavy lifting, Everyone dips into shared bowls, tearing bread, scooping broth, licking fingers. Double dipping. That's just dipping. And hygiene takes a holiday the moment the feast begins. You tell yourself you're strengthening your immune system as someone else's bread soaks where your spoon just was. Imagine sitting next to a noble, expecting refinement, only to watch him spit gristle onto the rushes at his feet. The floor is already a patchwork of bone shells and discarded scraps. Dogs weave between legs, scavenging what falls. Cats crouch near benches, eyes glowing, waiting their turn. A medieval banquet is part meal, part ecosystem. You take a bite, dodge a dog, and hope your bread plate doesn't collapse under the weight of gravy. Dessert, if it arrives, means fruit or honeyed nuts. In rare cases, sugar so exotic it's practically treasure. You savor one candied almond crunching its sticky shell and wonder if it's worth the toothache it will bring later. Spoiler, it probably isn't, but the taste lingers like sin. The real danger isn't the bugs or the grit, it's the aftermath. Foodborne illness is common sometimes, mild, sometimes lethal. A stew left too long on the hearth, a fish past its prime, and entire households end up clutching their stomachs. Summer complaint, they call it, as if diarrhea were just a seasonal nuisance. You laugh, then stop when you realize they mean it. By the end of the meal, your hands are slick, your teeth ache, and your nose twitches from smoke. Yet you also feel oddly satisfied. Against the odds, you're full. You dab greasy fingers on a piece of stale bread and toss it to the dogs. That's cleaning medieval style. The hall hums with voices, laughter, and clattering cups. For all its grossness, there's warmth here too. Company sustenance, a shared fight against hunger. You lean back, belly heavy, and decide you'll risk it all again tomorrow. You wake to the sound of roosters, but the first scent that hits you is yesterday's dinner lingering in the air. The hearth never fully cools, and pots left overnight often double as breakfast. Reheated stew is the standard, thick with grains, root vegetables, and whatever scraps of meat survived. Sometimes it's fine. Sometimes it tastes like last week's accident, reheated until it behaves. You sip cautiously, but hunger wins. In the Middle Ages, waste not only felt immoral, it felt suicidal. Food storage is a battlefield of its own. Without refrigeration, survival depends on salt smoke and fermentation. You see slabs of fish hung high in the rafters, smoke curling around them like protective hands. Meats are buried in barrels of salt so thick you wonder if you'll ever taste anything else. Cheese wheels sit on shelves, hardening into cannonballs. Even butter becomes salted until it bites your tongue. Each method works, but every method changes the flavor. You eat not for pleasure, but for calories, and your palate adapts until salty and smoky become the taste of life itself. Quirky tidbit fermentation wasn't just storage, it was entertainment. Ale brewed at home could range from decent to outright dangerous. A batch left too long turned sour. One brewed poorly might leave you seeing double. Yet people drank it anyway, toasting survival with mugs of questionable science. Cabbage fermented into sauerkraut milk into sour curds, and fruits into strange, fizzy concoctions. A medieval peasant might not know microbiology, but they knew one truth: if it bubbled and didn't kill you, it probably belonged on the table. Bread plays its daily role too. Bakers mix flour water and yeast if they can find it, and bake loaves dense enough to double as weapons. In hard times, they cut the flour with beans, peas, or even ground acorns. Some loaves taste earthy, others taste like regret. Historians still argue how often people ate famine bread versus proper loaves. But archaeological remains show grit worn into teeth, proof that millstones added stone dust to every bite. You chew and feel your molars file themselves into stubs. You pass through a marketplace and watch butchers hacking at carcasses selling meat that glistens a little too much in the sun. Flies buzz thick their tiny bodies landing with ownership. Buyers sniff cautiously, weighing cost against risk. Some soak their purchases in vinegar or wine, hoping to disguise what their noses already know. Spoiled meat wasn't always wasted. It was simply cooked more thoroughly. In other words, cross your fingers and add more garlic. Of course, the wealthy dined differently. Noble tables bent under roasted swans, pies filled with layers of venison, and exotic spices from trade routes. Dishes were drenched in saffron, cinnamon, and ginger, less for flavor than for status. Guests gawked at the extravagance, then picked through the meat with greasy fingers. The poor looked on, dreaming of just one slice. Yet even nobles faced the same risks. A roasted peacock still rotted if it lingered too long, and no amount of gold could buy immunity from bad stew. Meals for peasants were humbler pottage, a bubbling mix of grains, cabbage peas, and the occasional turnip. It simmered endlessly, new ingredients tossed in daily old ones, dissolving into mush. Each household had its own version, sometimes hearty, sometimes tragic. Imagine a pot that never empties, just changes flavor like a living soup. One spoonful could taste of onions, the next of barley, the next of something unidentifiable. Yet this humble dish kept families alive, stretching thin resources into edible endurance. After dinner, food scraps weren't wasted. Bones went to dogs, crusts to pigs, peelings to compost heaps. Even ale dregs found new life in bread or feed. You realize modern leftovers are luxuries. Here every crumb has a destiny. Hunger shadows every meal, making sure nothing lingers on the table for long. By nightfall, smoke still clings to your clothes, and salt still burns your tongue. But you're alive, and that's enough. In a world where famine lurks, with every bad harvest, eating isn't just an act of pleasure, it's defiance. You lick your fingers, ignore the grit in your teeth, and settle in by the fire stomach full enough to dream. You wander into the back corner of a medieval kitchen, where a sharp scent prickles your nose before you even see the source. Herbs hang in bundles, from rafters roots dry in baskets, and jars of powders line the shelves. This isn't just cooking, it's medicine. In a world without pharmacies, the kitchen is clinic doctor's office, an experimental lab rolled into one. You peer at a pot, bubbling with what looks like broth, but the cook insists it's a cure for coughs. Maybe it is. Maybe it's dinner. Healing here is a gamble shaped by tradition and trial. A fever might be treated with willow bark tea, surprisingly effective since it contains a form of aspirin. A stomach ache, chew mint or fennel seeds. Wounds are washed with wine or vinegar, which sting like fire, but help more than nothing. Sometimes you get a cure that works, though no one quite knows why. Other times you get charms, prayers, and powders that do nothing but empty your purse. Historians still argue whether medieval medicine leaned more on superstition or practical herbal knowledge, but your aching head doesn't care. You just want relief. Quirky tidbit animal parts often snuck into remedies. Powdered deer antler for strength, ground up earthworms for wounds, or owl broth for epilepsy. Some recipes sound like dares not cures. A physician might hand you a pouch of dried toads and swear it will protect against plague. You tie it to your belt, not because you believe, but because you're too scared not to. Superstition thrives where science hides. Doctors, when you find them, are a mixed blessing. Trained at universities, they talk about humors, blood phlegm, black bile, yellow bile, believing health is balance. Too hot, too cold, too wet. Everything ties back to these four fluids. They prescribe diets bleeding or purging. You sit through a lecture on the dangers of melancholic vapors and wonder if it's just medieval jargon for depression. You smile politely while gripping your side, hoping for real help. Barber surgeons, on the other hand, are men of action. They cut hair lance boils, pull teeth, and stitch wounds all under one roof. Their striped pole waves proudly, though the tools inside look better suited for carpentry than healing. You picture the moment a patient sits in their chair, knuckles white, while a blade slides through skin. The crowd watches because medicine is entertainment as much as necessity. Some faint. Others cheer. Either way, the patient bleeds. Hospitals exist, but don't expect sterile wards or crisp linens. They are places of charity run by monks and nuns focused more on prayer than cure. Beds line halls, patients groan in unison, and incense thickens the air to mask the smell. Healing comes from God, the attendants say, not from herbs or hands. Still, a bowl of broth and a warm blanket count for something, even if your infection ignores the prayers. Plague years bring the worst. Physicians in long robes and bird-like masks roam the streets stuffed with herbs and spices to filter the bad air. Children stare at them in terror. Adults whisper that the doctors are part death itself, swooping silently from house to house. Their presence means someone inside is already lost. You imagine the scratching of quills as they record symptoms, all while their own masks hide expressions of fear. Even the healers don't feel safe. In villages, though, wise women and local healers often hold more trust than distant physicians. They know which root calms a fever, which poultice draws out pus, which prayer comforts the dying. Their remedies pass from grandmother to granddaughter, stitched into memory rather than books. Sometimes they save lives. Sometimes they don't. But they always try, and in a world of uncertainty, effort itself feels like medicine. By evening, you find yourself sipping a bitter brew of herbs, handed to you by a villager. It tastes like dirt steeped in vinegar, but the warmth eases your chest. Maybe it's working. Maybe it's just the fire. Either way, you're grateful. Medieval medicine may not cure every illness, but it offers something modern pills sometimes can't: the feeling that someone cared enough to mix, boil, and watch over you. And in this world, comfort is half the battle. You're ushered to a stool beside the market, where a striped pole twirls in the breeze like a hypnotist's watch. Red for blood, white for bandage, the barber surgeon's unofficial logo. You already know what you came for, because everyone comes for the same thing: to be balanced. Your head aches, your chest feels heavy, or your thoughts have grown foggy. The remedy in this world is simple and universal. You let something out. A basin clinks onto the table, wide, shallow, with neat little graduations nicked inside the rim. It's a bleeding bowl, part measuring cup, part theater prop. The barber rolls his sleeves, fingers your forearm, and hums as if he's tuning a lute. He consults a chart pinned to the wall, a human figure covered in tiny labels. The vain man cousin to the famous zodiac man. Each line points to a vessel paired with symptoms, seasons, and stars. If your spleen sulks, cut here. If Saturn frowns, avoid that vein. You notice the moon sketched in the corner. Of course, the moon is involved. In a world where tides obey its pull, why not humor's mainstream? Fact: medieval medicine rides on the four humor model, blood phlegm, yellow bile, black bile, each tied to qualities like hot, cold, wet, and dry. Illness is imbalance. Phlebotomy promises restoration. Physicians prescribe it, learned men in gowns and fur-lined caps. Barber surgeons perform it, sleeves, rolled lancets bright. Monks keep leeches in cool clay jars, for gentler draws a hiss of water whenever the lid lifts. You are a vessel, they believe, and health is the art of decanting. The barber palpates a vein at your elbow and nods like a vintner approving a good cask. He wraps a strip of cloth above the joint, tying it just tight enough to make the vein stand and preen. Only a little, he says the most dangerous phrase in any century. The lancet flashes a brisk kiss of metal, and then the careful rhythm of drip paws drip into the bowl. The air smells faintly of iron and herbs from a nearby stall. You stare at the graduations and think absurdly of measuring flour. Quirky tidbit leeches have names in some infirmaries. Not saints' names, those belong to people, but jaunty little nicknames the attendants swear bring luck. A fat one christened Duchess clings to a wrist and waggles contentedly. A lean one called Needle sulks until coaxed with warm water. When full, they're tickled with salt or smoke, so they let go without giving back what they've taken. Somewhere a novice keeps a feeding list the way a baker notes loaves. Duchess, too, wrists one ankle. It's ridiculous. It's also deadly serious. You blink a little lightheaded, and the barber angles the bowl away, counting silently. There's a logic to it. Don't draw too much in winter. Prefer left arm for liver complaints. Avoid certain days when Mars is ascendant unless you crave trouble. Historians still argue whether practitioners truly followed astrological schedules rigorously or merely nodded toward the stars while obeying practical habit. Either way, patients prefer the certainty of ritual to the terror of chance. Across the stall, a wealthier client arrives with a letter from a physician phlebotomy at once cupping afterward. The cups are little bells of glass or horn. A flame licks briefly inside each. Then the mouth is pressed to skin, and the cooling air pulls flesh into a miniature dome. Dry cupping leaves round kisses that fade. Wet cupping begins like the rest with a prick, so the suction coaxes a slow ooze into the cup. The pattern looks almost decorative, a constellation mapped on a back. If you squint, you could call it art. You don't. Your mind wanders to breakfast salted fish and black bread, the gritty kind that files teeth, and you decide you've done harder things than this. Childbirth harvest, plague years, sheep that refuse the gate. Letting out a little blood feels almost polite by comparison. The barber unwinds the cloth and binds your crook with a neat twist of linen. Pink as a rose, he says, which is generous. You feel pale as a candle stub, but you nod as if complimented. The town square keeps time by spectacle. A man recovering from agues stumbles past a leech still clinging to his ankle like a stubborn brooch. A monk in a brown habit daintily pours a measure from a bleeding bowl onto the earth and murmurs a psalm, hedging bets in case heaven prefers its share. A girl holds a bouquet of rosemary under her nose, swearing it keeps faintness away. Everyone has a trick sip, salted ale, nibble a date, keep your feet warm. Medicine and folklore mingle like cousins who never learned boundaries. You've heard the warnings, of course. Too much letting drain strength. Too little leaves the fever to roam. The sweet spot shifts with season, age, and whim. In plague time, some physicians forbid phlebotomy, fearing it opens the body's gates to worse invasion. Others double down, insisting stagnation invites rot. Public faith sways with the last neighbor's result. If the miller's fever broke after a pint, then a pint for all. If he died, the stars were wrong. Either way, the barber's cue remains steady. There's a gentler version of the ritual for children, and the frail scarification and cupping along the shoulders, a leech behind the knee, a spoon of warm wine for courage. You watch a mother stroke her boy's hair, while a nun distracts him with a story about Saint Roch and his dog. The boy whimpers, then quiets eyes fixed on the dog part. Sometimes story is the only anesthesia available, and it works better than you'd think. A physician passes robes whispering, and pauses to lecture the barber softly about choleric temperaments and summer diets of cucumbers and dill. You half listen and decide the details matter less than the ritual's effect. You wanted help. Someone looked, decided, acted, and sent you home with instructions. Rest broth, no salted pork for 2 days. In a life ruled by weather and lords that sequence attention, action advice feels miraculous. Before you go, the barber gestures to a small calendar nailed near the chart. Saints' days and bleeding days share the parchment like old roommates. Spring and autumn show tidy clusters the recommended seasons for general evacuation. Whole households come then, father first, then mother, then children, in order of height, like a strange picnic, with basins. The idea is maintenance, not crisis clear. The channels keep the humors trim. You picture a modern tune-up and stop yourself from laughing. It would be rude, and also you're a little woozy. By afternoon, your head feels lighter, not clearer exactly, but emptied of the pressure that nagged all week. Maybe it's physiology. Maybe it's suggestion. Maybe it's the blessed quiet of having done something when nothing else seemed possible. You tuck a sprig of rosemary, your faithful callback, into your collar and promise to drink broth, to sleep near the hearth, to pretend you'll avoid pork. You won't. The world is salted pork and black bread, but for a day or two, you'll try. On the way home, you pass the leech jar again. The lid lifts, the water trembles. Duchess turns lazily sated and glossy queen of tiny miracles. The novice grins at you like an accomplice. She works, he whispers. You nod. Whether by nature numbers or narrative, something here relieves. In a place where pain has so few exits, even a measured drip into a shallow bowl can feel like a door. You sit cross-legged on a rough bench, your jaw aching before you even open your mouth. Dentistry, if you can call it that, is about to begin. The barber surgeon, yes, the same man who cut hair and opened veins, now approaches with a pair of iron pincers warmed by the fire. There is no soft chair, no sterile tray, no kind assistant humming pop music. Just smoke-stale beer and a crowd eager to see if you scream. Toothaches are more than inconvenience in this world. They swell cheeks, rot gums, and sometimes lead to fevers that carry people off entirely. Without fluoride toothbrushes or much knowledge of bacteria, cavities spread fast. Bread grit from millstones, meat sinew, wedge deep sugar for the rich clinging like glue. All of it conspires against your enamel. Historians still argue how widespread tooth decay really was, but skeletons don't lie jaws full of abscesses. Molars cracked from years of grit, incisors worn flat as paving stones. You imagine biting into an apple only to feel the crunch of your own tooth giving way. The cure, yank it. No numbing agents beyond strong ale or a belt to bite. The barber wedges his iron forceps around the offending tooth, muttering encouragement. The crowd leans in. One tug, two, then a snap as the root finally tears free. Blood wells fast, and you spit red onto the rushes at your feet. Relief floods in fierce and dizzying. Pain replaced by raw absence. You grin crookedly, half proud, half faint. Someone claps. In this town, losing a tooth is practically a performance. Quirky tidbit charms and spells often accompany dental pain. Some whispered rhymes to Saint Apollonia, patroness of tooth sufferers, hoping she'd carry agony away. Others wore amulets carved from wolf teeth, believing the predator's strength kept decay at bay. A few desperate souls even chewed on herbs, mixed with ground-up frog bones, swearing it soothed. It didn't, but in a world without anesthetic belief was balm enough. Not every case called for extraction. Sometimes, honey was packed into cavities to dull the ache-sweet relief quite literally. Sometimes, vinegar rinses or hot poultices were applied to gums. Occasionally, attempts at filling cavities with resin or wax are recorded, though results were uneven at best. Imagine eating warm porridge only to feel your makeshift filling melt like a candle. Comfort never lasted long. Mainstream fact tooth worms. Yes, many believed cavities were caused by tiny worms burrowing through enamel. Illustrations show them wriggling like sinister thread. Remedies range from smoking them out with henbane seeds to luring them with honey before crushing them. Of course, no worms appeared except in the imagination, but the theory lingered for centuries, gnawing at medical logic the way pain gnawed at molars. You notice that wealthy households sometimes fared worse, their access to sugar-leaving skulls riddled with decay. Nobles showed dazzling smiles in portraits, but in reality, many concealed gaps, blackened stubs, or wooden replacements carved to fit their mouths. Ivory or bone dentures existed, but they were rare and more decorative than functional. Eating with them was like chewing with fence posts. You picture a duke discreetly slipping his smile into a pouch before dinner. Extractions had their dangers. A slipped grip could shatter bone tear gum or leave fragments lodged inside. Infections followed, spreading swiftly without antibiotics. Some unlucky souls lost more than teeth. They lost their lives. Yet risk rarely outweighed relief. When pain throbbed with each heartbeat, you'd risk almost anything for silence. Crowds thin as evening falls, but you stay seated, tongue exploring the fresh gap. Already, your neighbors are advising you rinse with salt water. Chew only on the left, wear garlic around your neck. Everyone is an expert when it comes to suffering they narrowly avoided. You sip weak ale, grimace at the sting, and tell yourself, you'll never eat hard bread again. You will, of course. Hard bread is survival itself. Walking home, you pass a child showing off a lost baby tooth like treasure, proud of the gap in his grin. You envy him. His tooth fell with no forceps, no audience, no pain beyond the pinch of nature's clock. For adults, the bargain is never that kind. Teeth don't fall out gently. They're pulled torn, or rot away. Your jaw aches in sympathy at the thought, and you thank the dim firelight for hiding your grimace. As you lie down, cheek swollen, you clutch the tooth still in your hand. Some people keep them for luck, stringing them as talismans against future pain. Others toss them into rivers, hoping the current carries misery away. You roll yours between fingers, marveling at its jagged root, and finally tuck it into a crack in the wall. In the morning, the ache will still throb, but for now, you drift into uneasy rest. One tooth lighter, one story richer. You wake with a pounding head and a gut that won't settle. Maybe it was yesterday's salted fish, maybe the ale gone sour, or maybe the gods simply chose today to remind you of your mortality. Either way, you are sick, and in the Middle Ages, sickness isn't just misery. It's a crossroads between prayer potions and sheer luck. A neighbor suggests a purge. Out comes a jug of strong herbal brew, thick as mud, bitter enough to make your tongue recoil. The logic is simple. Get the poison out. If your body doesn't want to vomit on its own, they'll force it. You gag, you retch, you empty. Everyone nods in approval. To them, this isn't torture, it's therapy. Historians still argue whether purges ever truly helped or whether they only weaken bodies further. You don't care. You're too busy spitting bile into a bucket. Quirky tidbits, some remedies doubled as snacks. Dried figs steeped in vinegar to draw heat, or almonds ground with rosewater to cool the stomach. There are even recipes where breadcrumbs, honey, and strange spices are mixed into a paste believed to expel phlegm. You imagine trying to choke down a sweet, sticky lump while fever burns through your skin. Medieval medicine didn't separate flavor from function. Both mingled like cousins at a noisy feast. For fevers, bleeding returns as the universal answer. If you burn, you must be too hot, too full, too wet with dangerous humors. A vein is opened, or a leech set to work, drawing life away in careful drips. You lie pale, chilled, and they tell you it's progress. Relief sometimes follows, sometimes not. The ritual comforts the healthy more than the sick, convincing the watchers that they've done all they can. You close your eyes and wonder if you'll wake at all. Mainstream fact plague turned all this into theater of terror. The Black Death swept towns, killing in days, and remedies flew like desperate arrows. Some carried posies of herbs, believing sweet scents warded off bad air. Others whipped themselves in the streets, hoping God would spare them for their suffering. Doctors stuffed beaked masks with spices and strode through streets like ominous birds. Historians still debate whether those masks offered any real protection or just psychological armor, but to the dying, they were symbols of both hope and horror. At home, illness meant turning to family cures. A grandmother brewed teas of chamomile and mint. A mother wrapped a child in blankets, sweating the sickness out while prayers rose with incense smoke. The line between comfort and cure blurred. Sometimes the herbs soothed, sometimes they didn't. Yet the touch of a hand and a whispered blessing did what no university-trained physician could reassure the sick that they weren't alone. You think of hospitals, those sprawling halls run by monks and nuns. Beds line the room, each patient groaning softly, their sounds blending into a weary choir. Incense smothers the air, candles gutter in niches, and attendants murmur prayers as they pass. Healing here is not about science. It's about mercy. You are washed, fed, perhaps bled, but mostly prayed over. Some leave, healed, many leave in shrouds, but everyone leaves remembered in a litany of whispered names. Quarantine, too, makes its appearance. Town's close-gate ships wait at harbor. Sick families shutter their doors. Neighbors whisper behind hands crossing themselves as you pass. You cough once, and a circle clears around you. Fear is as contagious as fever. You long for fresh air, but the smell of smoke and waste clings to every lane, making each breath taste of sickness. You recover slowly, or maybe you just grow used to the ache. Medieval healing is less about cure and more about survival until your body finds balance again. If you do recover, it feels like victory. If not, there's always the priest, ready with oil blessing and candlelight. Life and death walk side by side here, and illness is simply the reminder. As the fever breaks, you sip a weak broth of leeks and barley, each spoonful a victory march. You know you could fall ill again tomorrow, but tonight you feel the miracle of breath steadying in your chest. Against the odds, you're alive. You close your eyes and drift grateful for herbs' prayers and the stubborn will of your body to cling to life. You rest your palm on a rough plank while the surgeon unrolls his kit like a traveling carpenter. Hook's needles clamps a saw that hums when he taps it with a fingernail, and a row of iron brands shaped like the alphabet of fire. There is no pillow, no curtain, no orchestra of beeping mercy. There is a bench, a basin, and a small crowd whose expressions hover between pity and curiosity. You breathe and smoke rosemary, your old talisman tucked in your collar, and the faint sweetness of wine warming gently by the hearth. Tonight, relief will arrive the medieval way awake. Surgery without sleep is a choreography of speed and nerve. The surgeon talks while he works, not to distract you, but to steady his own hands. He sketches the plan in short, calm sentences. First a cut, then a stitch, then a brand, to stop the red from wandering. There's method here, not mere bravado, mainstream fact by the later Middle Ages. European surgeons study and copy detailed manuals, Henri de Mondeville's notes on clean wounds, Guy de Chauliac's Chirurgia Magna, practical texts that turn craft into instruction. They debate which instruments to use, which dressings to apply, how long to wait before changing bandages. It isn't chaos, it's an early science with smoke on its breath. A boy brings a bowl of wine to rinse the wound. Another sets out linen strips torn to size. The surgeon shows you a clean needle and a twist of thread, and you swallow hard. Cautery irons glow in the brazier, their tips the color of sunrise. He smiles the way people do when they want you to focus on anything but pain. Look at me, he says, and you try. The crowd blurs. Your own pulse grows loud. Then comes the mercy you didn't expect, a brown sponge that smells like an apothecary's cupboard. He warms it in wine and lifts it to your nose. Quirky tidbit: some surgeons keep a soporific sleeping sponge, Spongia somnifera, steeped in opium, henbane, mandrake, and other dream-soaked botanicals. Breathe slowly, they say, as if sleep could be poured. Historians still argue whether these sponges were common in practice or mostly hopeful ink on parchment, but a few deep breaths soften the edges of the room. Not oblivion, just distance. You'll take it. The first cut is brisk and tidy. He keeps the blade low, the talk steady, the assistants closer than shadows. There's a rhythm: cut, compress, rinse with wine. Cut, compress, rewind your courage. Quick hands, quiet mind, an older surgeon once taught him, and it shows. For bleeding, he uses pressure, a twist of linen on small vessels, powder of alum or ash when he must. For the larger work, the brazier waits, an iron lifted the quiet hiss of hot meeting. Wet the smell like a blacksmith shop after rain. No gore spills here, only a brief sizzle that makes even the watchers hold their breath. You stare at a knot in the ceiling beam and count it as if numbers were saints. In head wounds, he would reach for a trephine, a little crown tooth circle, to lift a disc of bone and give the brain room to breathe. In crushed limbs, the saw would sing a low, purposeful song, while assistants held you in a human embrace tighter than prayer. It's awful in any century, but the rules are the same: speed control, and afterward, watch for heat swelling, stink the signs you dread. Somewhere, a monk once wrote that laudable puce shows a wound is mending a Galenic echo that lingers like a superstition. Later surgeons, like Theodoric, will argue for keeping wounds clean and closed wine-washed pus unwelcome. Historians still argue whether everyday practice followed the cleaner path or clung to the old affection for good suppuration. In this room, cleanliness wins because the surgeon has seen too many fevers bloom from filth. You catalog the comforts, within reach the warmth of the brazier on your shins, a hand squeezing yours in time with your breath, the whisper of linen when the assistant tears another strip. There is even humor quiet and odd, like wildflowers in a ditch. Hold still, you'll make me famous, the surgeon murmurs, which is either a joke or a warning. Someone snorts. You almost smile. Stitches come next, neat little gates across the skin. He favors silk when he has it, linen when he doesn't. And he ties knots like a man who believes knots can hold fate itself. He lays a soft dressing honeyed salve if he can afford it, plain cloth if he can't, then wraps the limb in a spiral that looks almost festive. You think of feast day ribbons and decide to forgive the comparison later. Pain is a weather pattern. It rolls in dark and sharp, then passes, leaving you blinking in a brief blue of calm. The boys trade out the wine bowl for fresh. You sip when told. The surgeon gives orders with the gentle tyranny of someone who has learned that people survive better when told exactly what to do. No heavy work. Sleep near the fire. Change the dressing on the third day. Speak up if the wound grows hot or starts to smell like the tanner's yard. You nod, as if you could ever forget that smell. Outside, markets chatter. Inside, medicine becomes a circle surgeon, assistants you the brazier, the linen, the wine, and somewhere in the corner, a saint's painted eye watching like an old aunt who has seen too much. Hospitals may pray more than they cut, but in a shop like this, the prayers are stitched into the work. A nun arrives with a small pot of ointment, wax, oil, rosemary. Your steady callback, maybe a pinch of myrrh if the convent cupboard is kind. She dabs the edges where skin thinks about being skin again. The cool touch steadies you. The saw hangs silent today, unused, but your eyes keep drifting to it. The assistant notices and tells a story about a shepherd whose leg was saved by a quick cut above a pattern of rot. How the man later learned to move like water on a crutch and beat boys half his age at stones. It's not strictly medical, but it is medicine. Even here outcomes are part skill, part season, part stubbornness. You have stubbornness. It thrums under your ribs like a drum. The surgeon checks the bandage one last time and signs his work with a smile rather than a flourish. He scribbles a note for your family broth. Rest clean hands. Clean hands. Small, modern-sounding advice sneaking through the centuries. He knows wine helps, that dirt hurts, that fire closes what fingers cannot. He knows, too, that some nights you will lie awake, listening to your wound think. When that happens, warm the sponge with wine, breathe slow, and wait for the tide to turn. You stand carefully. The room leans, then rights itself, like a boat in a kindly harbor. Someone tucks the rosemary deeper into your collar. You smell green and smoke, and a faint sweetness from the nun's salve. Outside the square is loud and ordinary. Inside your body, a quieter labor begins the slow knitting that no one sees. You thank the surgeon, the nun, the boy, with steady hands. You thank the brazier, because gratitude is indiscriminate when you're upright after a day like this. On the way out, you glance back. The kit is already rolled, the irons cooling the saw asleep. The bench waits for the next body that needs a bridge from hurting to healing. It isn't modern, it isn't gentle, but it is earnest. And sometimes, in this scoured, smoky century, earnest is enough. You step into the late light pulse calm for the first time in hours and promise yourself you'll keep the bandage dry, the fire banked, and the faith that flesh remembers how to close. You shuffle into a smoky room that smells of earth tallow and a sweetness you can't quite place. On a table sit jars filled with strange powders, bundles of dried plants tied with twine, and the curved horns of animals cut down seasons ago. This is no surgeon's shop. It is the chamber of charms where magic and medicine weave together in knots that few dare to untangle. Here you learn quickly that healing in the Middle Ages isn't always about herbs or scalpels. It's about belief stitched into daily life like thread into cloth. A mother lays her feverish child on a straw mat, murmuring prayers not just to God, but to unseen forces said to wander the night. The healer whispers a rhyme in Latin and sprinkles ash across the child's brow. Was it science superstition, historians still argue? For you, the important part is watching the boy's breathing, slow soothed by attention, if not by ash. Comfort, after all, wears many disguises. Quirky tidbit charms often included writing words backward on parchment, folding the slip, and hanging it around the neck as protection. Imagine a knight fierce in battle secretly wearing a scrap of paper scribbled with inverted Latin under his armor, or a farmer carrying a wolf's tooth to guard against nightmares. These small tokens offered reassurance in a world thick with fear. Whether they worked mattered less than the courage they lent. Some charms were oddly practical. Garlic hung over doors to ward off both evil spirits and unknowingly insects and illness. Rosemary. Your recurring friend was tucked into pillows to repel bad air. You find yourself smiling. The same herb that flavored stew also doubled as spiritual armor. Medieval logic wasn't always wrong, just wrapped in symbols modern eyes find amusing. Mainstream fact astrology guided many treatments. Physicians charted the heavens before deciding when to bleed a patient or apply a poultice. If Mars was in the wrong house, surgery was delayed. If the moon waxed better, to treat swelling, then believing the body mirrored the sky. You picture a sick man waiting not for the barber's free hour, but for Jupiter to shift position. Medicine by starlight, prescriptions written in constellations. You wander deeper and spot talismans carved from bone amber or jetstone. Some glow softly in the lamplight, others feel heavy with the fingerprints of generations who believed. A nun enters carrying a vial of holy water, blessing the room with a quiet dignity that silences even the most skeptical. Here, faith and fear mingle freely, neither entirely banished, both clung to like ropes on a storm-tossed deck. Whispers spread of darker practices, potions brewed with bat wings, or charms scribbled with blood. Yet most healers tread cautiously, blending prayer with plants, scripture with salves. Accusations of witchcraft lurk ready to ruin reputations. A woman praised for her knowledge today could face a pyre tomorrow if the wrong child died under her care. You realize healing wasn't just about illness, it was survival against suspicion. You watch as the healer burns a sprig of juniper, the smoke curling like ghostly fingers. The scent fills your lungs, grounding you, even as the ritual feels half play, half plea. The sick man beside you clutches his talisman tighter, eyes glistening. Maybe the smoke doesn't cure, but it comforts, and in this world, comfort sometimes buys another day of hope. Later, walking home, you notice charms nailed to door frames, herbs dangling from rafters, a horseshoe fixed above a tavern. Every street is stitched with invisible protection, a silent acknowledgement that medicine is never just science, but story. You rub the rosemary still tucked in your collar and laugh softly. Maybe you too are part believer now. The stars wheel overhead, and you think of physicians peering upward for guidance. You think of nuns whispering prayers, healers burning herbs, neighbors carrying amulets. Together, they form a patchwork of care, uneven, fragile, yet deeply human. You exhale into the cool night, realizing that survival in the Middle Ages depends as much on faith as on flesh. And faith, however peculiar, is a medicine of its own. You wake to the sound of hooves clattering on cobbles and the faint jangle of harness bells. Down the street, a cart rattles past its canvas roof, swaying like a weary flag. This is no merchant's wagon. It is the traveling apothecary, a moving pharmacy stacked with jars, powders, and promises. Children chase after it curious. Old women cross themselves. You step closer, drawn by the strange mix of curiosity and desperation that keeps such traders in business. Inside the cart, shelves sag under the weight of little clay pots sealed with wax. Vials of colored liquid catch the light like stained glass. Labels, scrawled in shaky Latin or plain vernacular, sometimes both tell you what's inside: powdered horn, dried violets, crushed pearls, or less noble things like ground earthworms. The apothecary himself wears a cloak dusted with powders, his fingers stained red and yellow, his eyes sharp, with the confidence of someone who trades in mystery. Mainstream fact apothecaries were licensed in many towns by guilds or councils, supplying remedies to both physicians and common folk. They were chemists before chemistry, measuring mixing and compounding based on recipes copied from Greek, Roman, and Arabic texts. Their shelves often carried theriac, a famous absurdly complex remedy made from dozens of ingredients, sometimes including viper flesh, believed to cure nearly everything. Historians still argue whether it was more medicine or myth, but demand for it lasted centuries. You watch him measure out powders with tiny brass scales, balancing grains of substance as carefully as a jeweler weighs gold. He mixes dried mint with a touch of vinegar, adds a sprinkle of ground oak bark, and folds the blend into a paper twist. For the stomach, he says, sliding it across the counter. His tone makes you believe, if only for a moment, that your guts won't rebel again after supper. Quirky tidbit. Many apothecaries stocked exotic items simply because they impressed customers. Unicorn horn, actually narwhal tusk, was prized as an antidote to poison. Dried mummy imported from Egypt was powdered and swallowed for strength. Bezoar stones from the stomachs of animals were set in gold cups to purify drinks. You imagine the sparkle in the seller's eyes as he whispers, "Nothing but the rarest." And you imagine the sparkle fading when your coin purse is empty. The smells overwhelm you. Sharp vinegar, sweet anise, smoky resin, all battling for dominance. It's not unpleasant, but it is dizzying, as if your head has stepped into a spice market during a storm. A boy sneezes loudly, and the apothecary nods, as if this proves the strength of his wares. He offers the boy's mother a sachet of lavender and rue to be hung near the child's pillow. It costs more than supper, but she pays anyway. Faith is worth coin when health is fragile. You notice the overlap between medicine and food. Cinnamon, ginger, pepper, all treasured as cures as much as flavorings. A wealthy household might stock its pantry with what poorer families considered exotic medicine. You picture a lord sprinkling pepper on his roast while declaring it wards off plague, or a lady sipping spiced wine in the belief it will calm her humors. Sometimes pleasure disguised itself as health, and no one objected. Not every apothecary was so noble. Some were accused of selling sawdust as exotic bark wine vinegar, as elixir, or colored chalk as powdered pearls. Regulations tried to rein them in. But in distant villages, who could check reputation was the only license that mattered, and a man with a good story could sell nearly anything. You think of modern salesmen and realize little has changed, only the packaging. The apothecary closes his cart at dusk, locking boxes and covering jars with cloth. He rides on his goods, rattling like bones in a chest. Behind him, people clutch their new cures, powders, syrups, charms tucked discreetly in pockets. Some will help, some won't, but all carry hope, and hope itself is the strongest drug of the age. You walk home with a small packet of dried rosemary and sage your purse lighter, but your heart oddly steadier. Will it heal you, perhaps? Or perhaps it will only flavor tonight's stew. Either way, you feel less helpless, and that feeling alone is medicine enough. You round a corner at dawn and nearly collide with the city's least glamorous public servants' pigs. Bristled backs, clever eyes, snouts already busy with the morning shift. They move like pinkish tide through the market lane, rooting under trestles for cabbage leaves, fish heads, and the unidentifiable gray bits that yesterday's customers politely pretended not to see. You hop back as a sow nudges your ankle, and in that instant, you understand a medieval truth that never makes the illuminated manuscripts, the garbage men, have hooves. By mid-morning, the butchers are in full chorus cleavers, thudding awful sliding, while the pigs keep pace turning waste into something you try not to imagine too closely. Entrails disappear, skins vanish, and the lanes that should stink like death merely smell like life that got a little out of hand. It's efficient in a way that feels both brilliant and horrifying. You pinch the rosemary at your collar, your traveling charm, and breathe through the green. The herb helps. So does the sight of the gutter clearing inch by inch, courtesy of a dozen determined snouts. Mainstream fact, many medieval towns allowed, even relied on free-ranging swine to clean streets and eat refuse, especially near shambles, butchery districts, and fish stalls. Then, predictably, they passed ordinances to control the chaos. In London, Paris, and other crowded places, bylaws required pigs to be ringed, a nose ring to stop deep-rooting yoked, or kept off main streets. Fines nipped owners who ignored the rules, though enforcement often sagged like an old thatch after rain. Between need and nuisance, policy wobbled. Back daisy, a swineherd calls tapping a stick against a barrel. The herd shifts like a single disagreeable cloud. The man wears a pouch of coins that clinks with every step. He earns honestly. Pigs trim the town's rot, and townsfolk pay for the privilege of not tripping over it. When trouble comes, when a stall tips, or a baby's crust is snatched, he's the first to hear about it. You notice a bell tied to a gilt collar on one fat sow, and the swineherd grins. She's the Abbey's, he says. St. Anthony's own. Quirky tidbit, in parts of France and elsewhere, pigs associated with the Order of St. Anthony were allowed to wander and feed, sometimes marked with bells or special collars. Charity by appetite, alms with a snout. People claimed the meat healed St. Anthony's fire ergotism, and the monks' pigs became minor celebrities, holy hoovers with curly tails. The idea that a bell made a pig, both blessed and above the rules, is exactly the sort of loophole humans adore. The pigs, of course, adore loopholes too. Not all stories snort so sweet. Pigs injure people. Children especially fall in their path. Records mention fines for owners whose swine caused harm, and the darker chronicles tell of animal trials, with swine solemnly condemned for deadly tramplings. You picture a pig blinking in a courtroom nose, twitching like punctuation, while men argue law in wigs that shed just as much hair. Historians still argue whether such trials were common practice or rare theater that later writers amplified. But either way, the message was plain responsibility didn't stop at the sty. You walk the shambles carefully because cleanliness here is relative and slipperiness absolute. Blood finds the lowest point drifts into gutters, and the pigs follow tidy little tugboats in a red tide, leaving behind damp cobbles and a city barely holding itself together. Dogs lope after them, opportunists with better PR, while cats conduct their quiet war against the rats who conduct their loud war against everyone. The whole scene is an ecology. Before the word existed, a circle so tight it squeals. A crier stamps to the corner and reads a new ordnance swine off the main market on feast days. Rings required by Michaelmas fines, doubled for repeat offenders. He thumps the notice onto a post with ceremonial enthusiasm. Within minutes, a sow steals a cabbage and proves the limits of law. Still, the notice matters. It gives anxious people the comfort of rules and gives the town something to point to when someone slips, falls, and invents new profanity involving bacon. You trail the herd as it noses toward the tannery quarter, where scraps of hide and fat peel from frames like tired scabs. The smell here weaponizes. Even the pigs blink. Yet they tuck in and the lane clears. You think of modern garbage trucks and composting schedules of orange vests and beeping backup alarms, and then you look at a creature happily converting filth into future pork chops. The Middle Ages invented nose to tail long before restaurants did. The town simply lived it loudly. A woman with a basket of turnip greens swats at a daring pig and then laughs because dignity rarely survives market day. They keep the flies down, she tells you, and you can't argue. Fewer heaps mean fewer clouds of buzzing misery, fewer outbreaks of what polite people call summer complaint, and maybe one less rat at the pantry door. A small mercy snorts and wags its tail. But pigs spread mess too. Their trotters track muck into homes. Their rooting undermines foundations. Their presence invites more dogs, more fights, more noise. A clerk mutters that swine are the city's second plague. A butcher replies that the clerk can eat parchment if he dislikes pork. Somewhere between is truth. The herd gives more than it takes until it doesn't. Balance again, the medieval obsession. You pause at a bridge and watch a hit parade of refuse float under wilted leaks. A limp fishtail something with feathers that once had ambition. The pigs can't reach the river's slick cargo, but you can imagine them trying snouts lifted like question marks. Across the water, a field of stubble waits for afternoon when the swineherd will drive his troop to glean missed grains. Nothing wasted if a mouth can reach it. Fat by harvest feast, by winter, he says, as if reciting liturgy. The day warms. Flies win small skirmishes. The pigs win larger ones. A girl with a ribbon in her hair tosses a stale roll to a gilt-edged sow, St. Anthony's again, and the bell jingles like a tiny verdict. You ask the swineherd if the bell brings special treatment. He shrugs. Makes people kinder, he says. To her and to me. Pilgrim psychology, you think holiness is armor for both animal and handler. Even skepticism softens when a bell rings. By late afternoon, city officers make a lazy tour, eyes on obvious violations, unringed snouts, animals in churchyards, sty gates left open. A man pays a fine with a muttered apology and a side of bacon that purely by accident changes hands behind a stall. Regulation is a conversation, not a cudgel. Coin meat and custom speak as loudly as parchment. As the sun leans toward the roofs, you notice the lane is clearer than morning. No heroic sanitation miracle, just 1,000 tiny bites. Today's guts won't be tomorrow's stink. Tomorrow will make new stink, of course, but that's not the point. Survival here is incremental, measured in cleaner steps before dark and quieter bellies after. You rub your rosemary again habit now and admit that the city would drown in itself without these low, grunting custodians. Walking home, you sidestep a final puddle that is only partly water and try on a modern thought in a medieval mouth circular economy. The phrase tastes odd but not wrong. What the town can't use, the pigs do. What the pigs make the town eats. What the town can't keep the pigs clean. It's messy loud and morally ambiguous if you stare too long, but so is the rest of the century. You wave to the swineherd, and he lifts his stick in salute bell, jingling a benediction you didn't know you wanted. Behind you, the last sow roots at a cabbage heart huffs and trots off, leaving the cobbles almost respectable. For a heartbeat, the street smells like vegetable and rain instead of death warmed over. You take the gift small as it is and step into the evening with a clearer path than you had at dawn, thanks to sanitation workers who never learned to read a bylaw but can parse a gutter blindfolded. Tomorrow, they'll do it again, and the city will pretend it was clean all along. Everyone needs a flattering lie. This one comes with crackling. You press deeper into the season's chill, trudging through the endless rhythm of survival that medieval peasants knew too well. The walls of wattle and daub groan against icy gusts, smoke coils lazily above the hearth, and the air carries that particular blend of livestock, warmth, and unwashed wool. You've already endured nights pressed cheek to cheek in a communal pile of bodies, mornings spent scraping frost from inside the walls, and afternoons layering rags into makeshift armor against the cold. Tonight, though, the story shifts again, reminding you that survival wasn't only about endurance, it was also about improvisation, rituals, and half-believed charms meant to outwit nature itself. Many peasants swore by protective customs, murmured prayers to saints of hearth and field, or tucked sprigs of holly above the doorframe as talismans against winter's cruelty. Historians still argue whether these rituals were truly believed or simply carried on because no one dared break tradition. Either way, you see the family huddled together, whispering old words as the fire dims. For them, faith was a layer as real as wool. Quirky remedies added another. A handful of onion skins stuffed into boots animal fat rubbed across cheeks, or even sleeping with a bread loaf tucked under one's arm to trap the heat. It sounds absurd now, but back then, desperate times made inventors of everyone. The sensory world of such nights was sharp and unforgettable, the acrid sting of smoke that made eyes water. The greasy smell of tallow candles sputtering near the hearth. The constant muffled rustling of straw beneath aching backs. If you close your eyes, you might hear the chorus of coughs, creaks of settling timber, and distant wolves punctuating the silence. It was never serene, yet somehow the chaos blurred into background noise, a lullaby of hardship. You might compare it to modern survival guides, except instead of high-tech sleeping bags and hand warmers, they had onion boots and goose companionship. It's like trading your winter jacket for a potato sack and calling it vintage. You probably wouldn't last an hour, though medieval villagers managed year after year. And you slipping into their rhythm might think these people had no choice but to lean on one another, to laugh at absurd remedies, to cling to faith when reason froze over. You might imagine yourself scoffing at the rituals. Yet even now, bundled under every blanket you own, wouldn't you try anything not to freeze? That thought alone ties you closer to their world. Scholars note that peasants blended Christian practices with older pagan customs, creating a patchwork of seasonal defenses. A charm against frost here, a saint's candle there, a carved wooden token tucked under bedding, all small gestures of defiance against an indifferent winter. They didn't always work, of course, but they gave comfort, and sometimes comfort was survival. And so as you settle deeper into the cold narrative picture, the household dimming to embers, whispers fading under rough blankets, charms dangling by the door. Outside, snow presses heavier on the thatch, the night colder than before. Yet within the fragile warmth of belief and improvisation lingers, carrying them and you into the next chapter of endurance. You step into the clang and hiss of a blacksmith's forge, the kind of place where iron and sweat become a language all their own. Sparks leap like fireflies, smoke curls into rafters darkened by years of hammer blows, and the air hums with the rhythm of mallets striking anvils. At first glance, it looks like the familiar world of tools and weapons, but here in the medieval village, the forge is also an apothecary of sorts, its heat and fumes folded into medicine and superstition alike. The blacksmith is a figure both feared and respected. His arms ripple with strength, his eyes glint from the shadows of soot, and his apron is a patchwork of burns and stains. People say his forge fire carries sacred power hot enough to chase away evil. Mothers bring sick children and hold them near the smoke, hoping it will burn away fevers. Some even pass babies between horseshoes nailed above the door, a ritual meant to protect them from illness. Historians still argue whether this was sincere belief or symbolic theater, but you watch the ritual with quiet awe. In a world with few certainties, even smoke becomes salvation. Mainstream fact smiths were often considered half magician, half scientist, their knowledge of metal and fire setting them apart. Their skills tied them to folklore, from Norse legends of dwarven forges to Christian tales of smiths blessed or cursed by divine sparks. In rural villages, a blacksmith's blessing might carry as much weight as a priest's. It wasn't unusual for people to bring charms to be strengthened in the forge, as if iron and prayer could bind together against disease. Quirky tidbit, some treatments involved plunging heated metal into water, then giving the patient that same water to drink. You picture someone grimacing as they swallow what amounts to tepid rust soup, convinced it has drawn strength from the iron. Others wore fragments of steel in little pouches, believing the hardness would guard their bones against weakness. If that sounds odd, remember that people today still wear magnets and copper bracelets for healing. Humans haven't changed as much as we like to think. The sensory assault of the forge is unforgettable. The metallic tang coats your tongue every breath, thick with heat and ash. Your ears ring with the steady cadence of hammer against steel, each strike reverberating in your chest. Sweat prickles your skin, the kind that leaves you sticky and smoky, long after you step back into the cool air. It is overwhelming, yet strangely comforting, because in that blazing cave of noise and flame, survival feels forged alongside the plowshares and horseshoes. Outside, villagers line up with requests, new nails, for timber-fresh blades, for harvest, and sometimes cures for ailments. One man presents a twisted piece of iron, begging the smith to hammer it straight so his child's crooked leg might follow suit. The blacksmith obliges, striking sparks that dance like brief hopes in the gloom. You might laugh at the logic, but try telling that father not to hope. As dusk creeps in, the forge glows brighter against the darkening street. Children, Watch wide-eyed, whispering tales of demons that fear iron and fairies that flee at the clang of steel. A mother hushes them, but not without a smile. Even fear can soothe when shared in story. And you standing there with ash in your hair, realize the forge is more than a workshop. It is a hearth for the whole village, blazing with labor belief and the faint promise of health. The blacksmith quenches one last blade's steam, hissing into the night like a sigh. The villagers disperse, each carrying a fragment of hope home with them, a nail, a charm, a sip of water touched by iron. The street cools, but behind you, the forge continues to burn steady as a heartbeat. For tomorrow, it will blaze again, and with it, the strange medicine of fire will keep the village's faith alive for one more day. You pause at a trestle table that looks less like medicine and more like a dare. Bundles of dried frogs, a jar of pale honey, a twist of garlic and onions tied with red thread, 2 pigeon wings, a crust of bread that has seen better centuries. The healer does not blink. For a throat closed by fever, she says, bind the living frog to it and set the heat to leave with his breath. You look at the frog looks at you, and you decide your throat is suddenly fine. Welcome to the Isle of Cures, stranger than the illness. Here recipes mix faith with accident, courage with comedy. The same hands that stew turnips also brew salves. The same pot that warms ale becomes a pharmacy after dark. You learn to keep a straight face because the person who swears by a remedy is usually your neighbor, and tomorrow you may need their firewood. Start with honey. That one makes sense. Spread on wounds. Honey draws, fluid seals out grime, and though no one here knows the word, stifles bacteria. Mainstream fact. Ancient and medieval texts recommend honey dressings, and modern tests agree it can help keep wounds clean. Add wine or vinegar to rinse, and you have an almost reasonable kit on a shelf, otherwise crowded with pigeons. You file that under, we can all live with this. Then the shelves tilt, moldy bread pressed on sores. Sometimes it soothes, sometimes you invite a second plague. Spiderwebs for cuts. Cobweb pads that cling and clot. It feels like a children's story until you feel how quickly they staunch. Urine as mouth rinse or on minor scrapes. Fresh warm, more ritual than remedy, but people swear by it. You hold your tongue, mostly because you're afraid they'll hand you a cup. Quirky tidbit, roasted mouse, shows up in some old remedies for coughs. A poultice of puppy fat, you do not ask questions for joint pains. Powdered earthworms mixed into salves for wounds that refuse to close. A physician in town keeps a notebook with ingredients that read like a bestiary fox lung hairs rennet bits of antler shaved as fine as flour. If you squint, you can almost see a logic like calls to like strength, borrowed from the strong. If you stop squinting, you see a pantry raid. Not all strangeness is folly. From an old English book, the healer recites a recipe for an eye salve, garlic, another allium wine, and ox gall left to stand in a brass vessel. It stinks up the corner and somehow quiets a sticky infection that blindfolded half the street last winter. Mainstream fact again, a reconstructed Bald's eye salve has shown modern activity against nasty bacteria. You can't see the microbes die, but you can see the crust clear, the eye open, the child smile. Accidents sometimes are just discoveries wearing bad cologne. The beaks and feathers pile up too. Burnt feather smoke waved under a fainting person's nose to call them back. Pigeon carcass split and warmed laid over a swell of plague bubo like a sad little blanket. A feather tucked in a shoe to ease a limp. You watch a mother hold a heated wing against her daughter's armpit and whisper a blessing to Saint Sebastian. The girl stops groaning, Does the bird heal, or the heat, or the mother's palm on her brow? Historians still argue whether such charms had any pharmacological bite or were simply rituals that calmed the watchers long enough for the body to do its hidden work. Then there is Theriac, Grand Queen of Panaceas, a syrupy constellation of dozens of ingredients. Spices, herbs, sometimes viper flesh, boiled into something expensive enough to taste like certainty. Apothecaries sell it by weight. Nobles dose themselves by calendar. You take a shining spoonful once, and your tongue spends the afternoon filing a complaint. Does it help? Possibly, if what ails you is the fear of being unable to afford Theriac. Down the lane, a man offers powdered mummy scraped from imported remains and sold as vigor in a pouch. Another hawks unicorn horn shavings, narwhal tusk in daylight against poison. A third polishes a bezoar like a small moon and promises it will swallow venom from a cup. You could roll your eyes, but people drink hope here as readily as ale. If the cup doesn't kill them, then for one night, the story did its job. Meanwhile, midwives and mothers keep a quiet counter-tradition that looks less theatrical and more useful. Warm oil rubs for stiff joints. Steam from chamomile over a bowl to loosen a chest. Crushed garlic on a cloth near a sick bed to sweeten the air, which if not sweet, at least becomes aggressively honest. A sprig of rosemary, your faithful companion, tucked in a pillow to settle nerves and nudge away lice. A linen strip soaked in vinegar wrapped around a throbbing wrist. You try that last one and feel the pulse step down from a march to a walk. Placebo? Perhaps. But relief is relief. You learn the etiquette of skepticism. When someone tells you a baked lark eases melancholy, you nod and ask for the recipe. When a neighbor swears that walking backward around a church cures warts, you adjust your stride and say you prefer your warts literate. When a priest insists the king's touch heals the king's evil, you keep a straight face. In a world of inherited power, miracles travel with bloodlines. Skepticism here is private, not public. People still have to live together tomorrow. The sensory grammar of these cures is unforgettable. Garlic and wine cling to the tongue. Honey warms under a palm and releases the faintest summer in a winter room. Feathers singe. Frog skin feels cold and rubbery before it kicks and returns to its favorite pond, taking you hope your fever with it. Ash drifts like gray snow. Vinegar brightens the nose. Your body records every texture as if memory itself were medicine. Modern comparisons sneak in, whether you invite them or not. You think of wellness fads, charcoal lemonades, copper bracelets, crystals bathed in moonlight. Swap Latin for hashtags, and the cart for a website, and half today's marketplaces could set up shop in this alley by noon. It is not mockery to notice the rhyme. It is empathy to admit you, and they share the same soft spot for a story that promises an easier morning. There is something else too, inventory discipline. You watch the healer cross off a remedy that failed 3 neighbors in a row. She does not throw out her whole art. She revises the recipe. Less ash, more wine. No frog this time. Try the eye salve on a stubborn cut. Skip the feather. Use the honey. It's not a university, but it is a ledger of what works in this particular place, in this particular season, with these particular bodies. An evidence base stitched by hand. Night slips in. The room glows the way rooms do when resolve outshines the candles. A man with a hacking cough tries the garlic wine steam and dozes for the first time in days. A child with a scraped knee wears a cobweb crown under a honey gauze and falls asleep, tracing the pattern like a star map. You with a wrist wrapped in vinegar linen and a pillow that smells of rosemary and smoke admit you feel better, not cured, but companioned. On your way out, you pass the frog, now sulking in a water bowl like a green philosopher. You salute him because gratitude costs nothing and might one day be a cure in its own right. Outside the lane smells like fish and rain and the faint sweetness of spilled theriac. You tuck the last of the honey into your pouch and the last of your doubt into your sleeve where it can ride along without steering. If the body is a stubborn house, these people knock on every window until one opens. And sometimes, admit it, that odd window is the one with the view. You shuffle toward the dim interior of a monastery, its thick stone walls holding the day's chill like a vault. The silence is broken only by the scrape of sandals on flagstones and the whisper of parchment as a monk turns a page. Here, medicine meets prayer, though it is hard to say where one ends and the other begins. Rows of shelves hold manuscripts copied by candlelight, their pages dotted with neat Latin, sometimes interrupted by smudges, where a weary scribe sneezed into his work. You settle into the quiet, realizing this is both hospital and library remedy and ritual. The monk's apothecary is lined with jars of dried herbs, sage thyme, fennel, yarrow. Their scents mingle earthy and sharp, a reminder that gardens here grow cures as well as food. Brother Matthew crushes leaves with a mortar and pestle, his lips moving in a chant that blesses each motion. To him, healing is a dialogue between God and garden. Mainstream fact monasteries preserved medical texts from antiquity, translating works of Galen and Hippocrates, weaving them with Christian theology. These texts later seeded universities and spread knowledge through Europe. Without monastic scriptoria, much classical medicine might have vanished entirely. But even cloisters had their quirks. Quirky tidbit, some remedies recommended writing holy words on parchment, then soaking the parchment in water and giving the patient that water to drink. Faith literally dissolved into the body. Other texts suggested grinding the dust of saints' bones into wine or holding relics over a wound to transfer divine energy. Historians still argue whether these practices were seen as medicine or miracles, or whether anyone cared about the difference. The sensory atmosphere is unmistakable. Beeswax candles pool golden light, softening the harsh lines of stone. Incense smolders spicy and resinous, coating your tongue with a bitter sweetness. The sound of quills scratching mixes with the faint gurgle of water from a channel that keeps the herb garden irrigated. If you close your eyes, you might think you're in a kitchen. Open them, and you see a pharmacy dressed as a chapel. You notice how their remedies often blend practical wisdom with ritual. A monk treats a fever with willow bark tea, bitter but effective for its salicylic acid is aspirin's ancestor. Then he blesses the cup as if to double the dose with grace. He prepares a poultice of honey and thyme for an infected wound, then places a relic of Saint Blay nearby. One foot in empiricism, the other in mystery. You wonder if patients minded which half worked so long as they walked out healed. Modern parallels creep in. You think of hospitals with chapels attached of doctors who also pray with patients of wellness stores that sell both vitamins and crystal water bottles. Swap the Latin chant for soothing background music and the parchment for glossy brochures, and you realize the monastery wasn't so different from today's integrative clinics. You, standing near a lectern, run your fingers across vellum that feels oddly like skin. On it, a scribe has copied an herbal recipe: batoni for headaches, chamomile for digestion, rue for sharp pains. In the margin, A doodle of a little man with a sword fights a dragon perhaps sketched by a bored novice. Knowledge here is fragile, personal, and alive. Outside, the cloister garden blooms with order square beds of mint, dill, sage, lavender, each marked by wooden signs carved with crosses. Bees hum over blossoms. Monks stoop to tend the soil. And the air smells cleaner than any street in the village. This is their laboratory, a patch of earth that feeds both body and soul. Yet not everything is serene. The infirmary wing houses patients moaning under rough blankets. Some recover on broths and herbs. Others slip away despite prayers and poultices. A monk writes each name into a ledger, recording not only the remedies tried, but the outcomes. It is rudimentary science, though cloaked in devotion. You glimpse the beginnings of data collection, a small defiance against chaos. One evening, a bell tolls. The monks gather to chant their voices, weaving into harmony that echoes through the stone. Patients listen, some soothed, others too weak to stir. You sit in the half-light, realizing the chant itself is medicine, a rhythm that slows breath, a vibration that calms pain, a communal heartbeat in a world that often felt solitary. And you, wrapped in the incense haze, realize the monastery is more than a place of healing. It is a bridge between ages, carrying fragments of ancient wisdom, layering them with ritual, and handing them down, imperfect but enduring. Without these quiet copyists, the thread of medicine might have snapped. Instead, it tangled and knotted, but held. As you step out into the night, the air cool against your face, you glance back at the glowing windows. Inside, monks still chant, still grind herbs, still copy words by flickering candlelight. Their work hums on, unseen, but steady. And you carry with you the sense that history's cures were never just about herbs or relics. They were about hope, persistence, and the stubborn human habit of writing survival into every margin. You drift from the monastery's quiet into the talky bustle of a university town where medicine dresses itself in fur-lined robes and Latin verbs. Professors stride under arcades with books chained to lecterns, students trail like geese, and somewhere a bell peals to announce the next dose of certainty. Here, healing is a grammar, Galen for nouns, Hippocrates for verbs, Avicenna for the long, elegant sentences in between. You take your place at the back of a hall and listen to a lecture on hot, cold, wet, and dry, as if weather could be poured into veins. The classroom smells of wax ink and wool. A painted zodiac man hangs on the wall, the human body mapped with tiny stars and captions. The professor taps Aries on the scalp Libra, at the kidney Scorpio near the groin, explaining when to bleed and when to wait. Because the moon meddles with everything from tides to tempers, it sounds theatrical until you remember your own faith in good timing. Don't lift heavy. Don't eat late. Don't anger Saturn. Historians still argue whether physicians truly timed procedures by astrology in daily practice or merely performed respect for the stars to comfort paying patients. But the chart keeps its place like a family portrait. Mainstream fact for centuries, the Canon of Medicine by Avicenna ibn Sina is copied, glossed, and wrestled with across Europe, alongside the Regimen Sanitatis Salernitanum, a popular verse handbook on health. Salerno Montpellier Bologna names that churn out learned doctors who prescribe diet, sleep, exercise, and the ever-present phlebotomy. You admire the order of it, seasonal menus, temperate baths, light suppers, dry feet. Even if the humors are poetry, the routine is medicine. Then the professor holds up a glass urinal, and the room leans forward as one. Uroscopy is the showstopper. Honey amber, straw, wine red, cloudy as a November morning. The color wheel becomes diagnosis. Your physician peers swirls, sniffs, and if he's bold or from a bolder school, tastes a drop searching for sweetness that whispers of a wasting illness. You gag silently and also admit the method sometimes helps. The urine flask doubles as a status symbol. A doctor on the street with one in hand is a walking advertisement. I look, therefore I know. Quirky tidbit itinerant piss prophets roam markets, taking flasks at arm's length like suspect bouquets, then declaiming ailments and remedies in a voice that could sell thunder to a storm. Not all knowledge lives in halls. A barber surgeon mutters that the learned can recite Avicenna, while a cyst laughs at them. A midwife rolls her eyes and points to the sky only when it threatens actual rain. You move between worlds, noting how scholarship and shop talk overlap like roof slates neat from a distance, leaky up close. A university man prescribes a cooling diet of cucumbers and dill for choleric temper. The village woman prescribes less shouting at the cow and a nap by the hearth. On good days, both are right. Your senses file the differences. In the school, you smell vellum and lamp oil. In the lane, you smell vinegar, garlic sweat, and wine. In the school, you hear Latin cadences. In the lane, you hear try this. It helped my cousin. The school keeps books chained to desks. The lane keeps recipes chained to memory. You realize you trust both for different aches. The professor for a regimen, the village for a poultice, the barber for a splinter that won't quit. Medicine is not a single room here. It's an alley with many doors. The university also keeps a bone-deep caution about opening bodies. Dissections exist, but are rare, formal, often seasonal. A single winter anatomy becomes a year's worth of story. The master reads from a text while an assistant points the book, sometimes trumping the body beneath the knife. Historians still argue whether scholastic loyalty to ancient authors slowed surgical insight or preserved a scaffold sturdy enough to climb later. You watch a student whisper, "It looks different," and then write carefully exactly what the book says. Progress, you suspect, will arrive between lines. Back on the street, the physician's astrolabe flashes in the sun as he checks an hour before setting a lancet. A patient relaxes, reassured that Mars has been properly dodged. Placebo is not a medieval word, but the effect is medieval. And modern alike, ceremony lowers the shoulders. Breath slows, pain loses an inch. You compare it to today's neat waiting rooms with ferns and softly urgent posters. Different props, same spell. You pass a stall selling almanacs, dream books, and humble herbals, copied in a scrawl that leans with haste. A recipe leaps out: betony for headaches, sage for sore throats, rue for sharp pains. The margin shows a doodled snail. The author knew his audience mix instruction with a wink. You tuck a sprig of rosemary faithful companion and running joke into your collar again, because it does a little for smell and a little for nerves, and you've stopped insisting on separating the two. The social dance around learning can be sharp. A guild posts fees for consultations to keep out quacks. A city statute warns midwives not to use superstitious mutterings, then quietly asks the same midwives to assist at births, because outcomes talk louder than statutes. A bishop funds a bed in the infirmary for the poor sick, stipulating prayers hourly. A rich widow endows an anatomy each winter for students who promise to attend Mass first. Science and structure knot together in ways you can neither praise nor untie. What about results? Some patients recover on regimens that look suspiciously like common sense air light broth sleep. Some die despite venesection on the right day. Some live because a barber cleaned his hands in wine and bound wounds with fresh linen. Some live, if we're honest, because their bodies chose life. Historians still argue whether learned medicine in the Middle Ages improved survival on average or mainly comforted the anxious with order. You, a single case among thousands, find comfort useful. You take stock of your own little cabinet of beliefs. Rosemary in the collar, because it steadies you. Wine for rinsing a scrape, because you've seen it help. A glance at the moon, not because you worship it, but because timing has betrayed you before. You keep an ear for a professor's regimen and an eye on the midwife who's delivered 10 babies through winter without losing mother or child. If this is superstition, it is also curation. You are building a portfolio of sense. Toward evening, the lecture hall empties, and the lane fills with cook smoke and the metallic clink of the apothecary weighing powders. You pass a student translating a chapter on fevers and a woman pinning a sprig of rue by her doorway. Both labors aim at the same enemy chance. Bedtime finds you by the hearth, fingers smelling of vellum dust and rosemary. You don't pretend to know which part of the day saved you the book, the chart, the flask, the herb, or the hand that wrapped your bandage with quiet competence. You only know you're warmer, calmer, and still here. You fold your cloak, lie down, and let the room blur into soft amber. Somewhere, a bell marks compline. Somewhere, a barber cleans his lancet. Somewhere, a student copies a margin note that will outlive him by centuries. You breathe in smoke and green and faint wax and let the old grammar of faith and habit conjugate into sleep. Tomorrow, we'll argue again about hot and cold, wet and dry stars and seasons. Tonight, you keep your body in the only balance that finally matters, horizontal breathing alive. You step into a city that stinks of ambition. The walls rise high, markets groan with voices, and somewhere above the clamor, a bell insists on order. Here, health is not a monk's quiet prayer, or a barber's quick stitch, it is civic duty. Regulations hang on wooden boards at the market gate, reminding butchers to keep meat-fresh bakers to weigh loaves fairly, and brewers to dilute only with water, not ditch runoff. You smile wryly. It sounds progressive until you smell the gutter sliding past your boots. Cities of the later Middle Ages struggled to breathe under their own growth. Mainstream fact, by the 14th century, municipal councils passed ordinances on waste disposal, slaughterhouse placement, and even curfews for pigs roaming the streets. Pigs were efficient garbage collectors, yes, but also public menaces. More than one chronicle records children trampled under trotters. You can almost hear the council debate, feed the poor, or spare the cobbler's boy from hooves. Quirky tidbit in 1379. Paris banned pigs, yet exceptions were made for monasteries. Apparently, monks' pigs were more polite. Your senses file the chaos. Stalls reek of salted fish and raw hides. Smoke from forges coats the air with iron tang. The river carries waste and prayer candles in equal measure. At dusk, torches hiss in damp air, lighting alleys, where cats stalk rats, fattened on grain stores. You flinch when a cart of night soil tips too close, reminding you that civic ordinances did not always translate into civic practice. You listen to the rhythm of urban medicine. Town criers announce plague measures, keep fires burning in the street, avoid strangers, carry posies of herbs. Physicians advise fleeing if you can, praying if you can't. Historians still argue whether quarantine measures, like Venice's 40-day isolation of ships, truly slowed contagion, or merely gave survivors the illusion of control. Either way, the word quarantine still sticks, a medieval invention surviving in modern clinics. In the square, an apothecary sells sugared spices at outrageous prices, promising they purify both breath and soul. Nearby, a surgeon sharpens knives before a small crowd, his booth as much theater as therapy. Children watch with grim delight as he demonstrates on a carcass. The crowd claps as though health were a performance you could applaud into being. You wonder how many claps it takes to stop bleeding. Modern comparisons are hard to resist. You think of health departments issuing codes of food, inspectors checking thermometers of rat control programs with public posters. The medieval version has fewer clipboards and more shouting, but the impulse is the same: to civilize the stomach and the sewer in equal measure. And just as today, enforcement depends less on law than on human stubbornness. You note the paradox in a city. This dense danger is communal, so solutions must be too. Yet trust is thin. One neighbor blames bakers for famine, another accuses foreigners for plague, a third mutters that comets spoil the air. Rumors ripple faster than ordinances, and still people crowd the market because bread waits nowhere else. You see resilience too. A tanner's wife scrubs her threshold with vinegar. Children wear garlic strung on twine. Housewives toss rosemary and juniper on the hearth so their smoke laces the rafters. Placebo, perhaps. Comfort, definitely. You wonder if today's scented candles don't play the same role, though fewer claim they deter plague. The city also invents bureaucracy for the body. Inspectors find butchers who dump offal into rivers. Councils fund hospitals, some dedicated to the poor, others to pilgrims, still others to lepers pushed to the margins. Bells toll when carts carry the dead, not just to mourn, but to count. Numbers creep into medicine here, tallies that show civic health, rising or collapsing. You watch a clerk sharpen his quill to note another death, another ordinance, another attempt to govern the ungovernable. And then plague returns, ignoring every ordinance. Fires roar in streets, perfumes burn, prayers echo. But death scythes through alleys faster than law can walk. Yet even amid panic, order persists. Quarantine is refined burials, managed survivors tasked with cleaning. Out of disaster comes a stubborn belief that civic medicine is possible. Historians still argue whether this faith saved lives or simply civilized grief. But the city itself survives, scarred but still standing. You wander toward the edge, where fields meet walls. Farmers bring in hay, sweating under summer heat, while watchmen scan the horizon for strangers. The line between rural and urban blurs here. Manure still clings to boots, but ordinances ride in with carts. A farmer rinses his hands in vinegar before unloading cheese, half hygiene, half superstition, half habit. You count 3 halves and stop correcting. Arithmetic bends under survival. At sunset, you climb a tower and look down. The city sprawls crooked and alive, its smoke painting the sky violet. From here, you see both the problem and the promise, people stacked together, diseases racing, laws chasing after them. Yet you also see windows, glowing markets, humming bells, tolling not just for death, but for curfew meals, prayers. The city has become its own patient, always a little sick, always struggling, but somehow always waking up the next day. You settle into your cloak. The bell tolls again, not plague this time, but compline. Streets, quiet torches flare, and the city dreams its uneasy dream. You drift with it, half amused, half comforted, knowing that urban medicine, like the city itself, thrives on contradiction, fragile, yet stubborn, filthy, yet determined mortal, yet loud. You rise into the late Middle Ages twilight, a time when every remedy has been tried, tested, doubted, and still desperately clung to. The air carries both incense and sewage, rosemary smoke and fear. You feel as if you've walked through an encyclopedia that is half cookbook, half prayer book, and half survival manual. Yes, too many halves. But that's how the medieval world works, overlapping, leaky, and impossible to balance. Mainstream fact by the 15th century Europe's medical landscape was layered. Universities lectured on Avicenna and Galen monasteries, tended gardens, and copied herbals. City councils enforced ordinances, and barber surgeons stitched wounds on street corners. Each claimed authority, yet none held monopoly. Medicine was not a pyramid with experts at the top. It was a patchwork quilt that barely covered the body, and it somehow endured. Quirky tidbits, some cures grew more theatrical. A recipe instructed, write the Lord's Prayer backward. On an egg, feed it to the sick. Others advised wearing a live toad in a pouch against the skin to draw out fever. You can almost hear the groan of the unfortunate, who ended up smelling like both sweat and swamp. Historians still argue whether these outlandish remedies were ever widely practiced or just scribal jokes. But the fact that they were written at all tells you something about hope's creativity. The sensory world sharpens as you remember it all. The metallic tang of bloodletting bowls stacked in barbershops. The sticky sweetness of honey salves cooling inflamed skin. The pungent smoke of juniper fires in plague years. The rustle of parchment. The mutter of prayers. The slap of boots in muddy streets. Medicine is not abstract here. It stings, steams, smells, and stains. You think back to modern equivalents, energy drinks, promising health wellness influencers pushing detoxes, supplements that claim to fix everything from mood to memory. Swap the medieval herbal for today's capsule, and the pattern remains. Then as now, people craved control over fragile bodies in chaotic worlds. You probably won't survive this, they might have admitted, but let's try anyway. The debates never stop. Did bloodletting kill more than it saved? Did herbal poultices sometimes cure? Did astrology matter? Or was it merely comforting ritual? Historians still argue whether medieval medicine made measurable progress or simply kept patients company while time or the immune system decided. The truth is murky, tangled between miracle and misstep. Yet isn't that what makes it human? You stand in a small chamber lit by candlelight, a patient groaning on a pallet. A physician feels his pulse, a priest murmurs prayers, a wife lays a rosemary sprig by his pillow. Science, faith, and love crowd together, all trying to coax one more breath. You realize survival was never only about remedies. It was about community persistence and the refusal to leave someone alone in the dark. As the scene blurs, you carry away a strange comfort. Medieval medicine may look absurd, laughable, even revolting from your vantage, but it was also stubbornly hopeful. Every leech jar, every herbal, every charm whispered over a fever was a declaration life matters and we will fight for it with whatever tools we have. Night deepens. A bell tolls faintly somewhere between monastery and market. You wrap your cloak tighter, lie down, and let the sounds of the medieval world fade. Chance coughs, clanging hammers, the shuffle of healers and patients alike. The Middle Ages settle around you like a patchwork blanket, imperfect, scratchy, but oddly warm. You drift amused and comforted, knowing that across centuries, the gross facts you've witnessed were also survival stories. And survival in the end, is its own kind of medicine. The night stretches softer now, the noise of medieval streets receding into memory. You lie still, eyes half closed, while the echoes of chants, market cries, and barbers' knives dissolve into a kind of hush. What remains is not the clamor of gross remedies or the clatter of chamber pots, but the quieter truth beneath it all. People tried. They tried with herbs, with relics, with books, and with hope. And even when those cures were half wrong, the effort itself stitched meaning into fragile days. You breathe slower. The air feels cooler, cleaner, as if the rosemary sprigs burned on so many hearths now float invisibly around you. Each inhalation tastes faintly herbal, faintly sweet, like honey laid on wounds centuries ago. Exhalations carry out the weight of streets, the stench of leeches, the cough of plague. What lingers is only the comfort that across centuries others also lay down. Weary, also sought rest, also trusted the night to do some quiet healing. The rhythm eases further. Your mind drifts across the patchwork of history, monks grinding herbs, physicians squinting at urine flasks, midwives whispering encouragement, councils posting ordinances, families stringing garlic patients, clutching charms. It all slows into a gentle pattern like quilt squares fading into one cloth. Imperfect, yes. Scratched and stained, certainly, but still warm enough to cover you as sleep leans close. And now, nothing urgent remains. No remedies to recall, no debates to weigh. Only the softness of your bed, the steady pull of gravity, and the reassurance that even the strangest, grossest facts could not erase humanity's stubborn will to care for one another. Let the candles gutter low. Let the bells fall silent. Tonight, the Middle Ages have finished their long story. You are safe, breathing, drifting, sweet dreams.